The air leaves the lungs along with the last of the strength. The wounded body refused to obey. Every breath was accompanied by excruciating pain. And before him, triumphant, stood the one who brought this pain. The blue eyes reflected only the composure of the winner. And there, among the rubble, lay the one who had once stood next to her. Everywhere there are only lifeless bodies, victims of this merciless battle. His face was frozen in despair, mixed with bitter tears and blood, and the winner just laughed madly, enjoying the fruits of his triumph. But in the eyes of the defeated man, a final spark flared up, one of rage and unbending will. A merciless blow pierces him through and through. Their gazes met for the last time, anticipating the inevitable end. Under the streams of fiery rain one fell, the other stood above him. The public celebrated. Huang Shenghuan, the worst villain, is sentenced to death. The loud bang of a hammer put an end to the story. Now the walls of an impregnable prison and countless guards awaited him. But the so-called villain still had a sly grin on his face. He was locked in the very heart of an impenetrable fortress, Ludus Prison. His cell was located deep underground on the 5th level. And the loser, watching all this, only grinned maliciously. Meanwhile, the shadows thickened and new figures appeared on the horizon. Among them are a cunning vizier and an indomitable warrior, each with his own goal. But the true battle will not be for power, but for the very concept of equality, echoing deep within the soul. But whose voice will dare to break this age-old silence? And this growing silence is interrupted by an uninvited guest, whose voice, thin and piercing, reminds us of the fragility of existence, Xiao Kang-ho, the warden of Luculus Prison. His intense gaze, like invisible fetters, squeezes the sickly figure of Seo Kang-yu, who has found himself captive not only by illness, but also by someone else's merciless control. The warden, with a sly smile on his lips, enjoyed his dominance, anticipating a response. His words, like poisonous arrows, pierced the exhausted body of Seo Kang-yu, who, clinging to the last crumbs of hope, tried to explain something. But suddenly, pain and despair burst out, burning him from the inside, and Seo Kang-yu's eyes flashed with an ominous fire, foreshadowing a storm. The warden, completely unperturbed, only chuckled coldly, continuing to dictate his will, while Seo Kang-yu plunged into the abyss of impotent rage. However, this gloomy spectacle is suddenly interrupted when a majestic figure appears in the doorway, whose presence in itself promises change. She burst into this world of destruction, like a goddess of war, challenging tyranny with her mere appearance. Her voice sounded like a warning, demanding guarantees in this deadly game where their lives were at stake. Addressing everyone present, she sought to enlist their support and unite them in the face of the coming trials. Seo Kang-yu, having accepted the challenge or agreed to her conditions, met that gaze without a shadow of a doubt. Elsewhere, beyond the chaos, Seo Kang-yu confirmed his decision by joining the unofficial coalition. The warden seemed to listen to Seo Kang-yu's words, deep in his own dark thoughts. And then, like a thunderclap, came the shocking news of an imminent execution in which the overseer himself intended to take part. The supervisor clearly outlined Seo Kang-yu's role, placing the burden of responsibility on him, but retaining control over key operations. With a heavy sigh filled with hidden emotions, Seo Kang-yu accepted his fate, preparing for the next stage. And the final touch to this gloomy picture was the invitation to say goodbye, as if a harbinger of farewell not only to the past, but also to a possible future. These letters, these flowers, every object here is a silent echo of unfulfilled hopes and losses. But on the city streets there was a different call, a furious cry for justice, demanding retribution. And so, amid the echoes of grief and the demands of the crowd, the world prepared for the final farewell. Seo Kang-yu, wounded not only in body but also in soul, seemed to have resigned himself to the inevitable, his gaze fixed on the void. One flower, a tender farewell to what was and what could have been. Hundreds gathered within the walls of the memorial hall to pay their respects to the fallen, to the heroes whose lives were cut short. And at that moment, in an ominous silence, the day of reckoning arrived, the last day for Huang Shenghuan. But it wasn't only the living who cried. The portraits showed smiles from those who had already found eternal peace, like Seo Kang-ho. And these smiles, these memories pierced Seo Kang-yu's heart with a sharp pain, causing streams of tears. While others suffered, someone else seemed to celebrate his grim victory, smiling at fate itself. The smoke from the incense sticks curled upward, carrying with it prayers and sorrow, dissolving into the air. Alone with his grief, Seo Kang-yu searched for answers in the flickering candlelight. But his loneliness was broken by a question, a call that made him shudder. A uniformed figure towered over him, its shadow falling on his bent back, foreshadowing new trials to come. It was Jo Se-byun, a prison guard at Lucullus prison, who came with an unexpected proposal. Seo Kang-yu's gaze flashed, reflecting an internal struggle between hope and distrust. Without further ado, she pushed the tablet towards him, the play button frozen on the screen. His question hung in the air, full of confusion as he stared at the mysterious object. And Jo Se-byun coldly explained, in front of him was a recording of Hwang Sung-hwan's execution today. And every step of these boots, every sound of their heavy movement seemed to echo in his soul, foreshadowing new turns of fate. The footage of the execution he had just seen seemed to poison his thoughts as he was led past a familiar face. The madman in handcuffs seemed to recognize him, and a strange, frightening smile played on his lips. And then came the question that Kang-ho hadn't expected, as if the madman had seen right through him. Was he Seo Kang-jo's brother? The prisoner seemed to read his face, asking with a caustic grin if Kang-ho had become a warden because his brother possessed the same terrible abilities. Kang-ho's silence only seemed to anger the madman, who continued, curious to know which of the brothers was the elder. Kang-ho finally came to his senses, a sharp cry escaping his lips. He was tormented by his own question, which he now threw at the prisoner. What does it feel like to take someone's life? The madman's grin only widened in response to Kang-ho's shock. After all, he, the warden, should know, right? And a terrible question, like a blade, pierced his consciousness. What is it like to kill people like him, and what does it feel like? The only response was a disappointed sigh, as if Kang-ho had not lived up to this madman's expectations. Disappointed was all Kang-ho could manage to squeeze out, feeling a wave of bewilderment wash over him. With a cold smile, the prisoner explained that for him, killing was just a light touch, after which the victims exploded. They, like soap bubbles, disappear without a trace, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. Kang-ho began, but the words stuck in his throat, unable to convey the depth of his suffering. He admitted that even the execution of such monsters as the prisoner, in whom there was nothing human left, weighed on him with unbearable guilt. The nightmare did not let him go, penetrating into the very depths of his consciousness, even in his sleep. The images of the condemned, their last seconds, were always before his eyes. Every time he saw distorted faces, heard cries of, "You are the same murderer as we are," and this tormented him. The ghosts of the executed did not let him go. They appeared in his dreams, tormenting his soul. But despite everything, Kang-ho continued on his way, fulfilling his duty because someone had to do it. And so, another sentence, pronounced without a shadow of a doubt, was being prepared for execution against Hwang Sung-hwan. The last word, a ritual question that hung in the air, colliding with the insolent, anticipatory grin of the condemned man. His gaze, full of madness and defiance, threw out a final, terrible question: who is really in charge here, before the order for execution was given? 3. The mechanism of justice, cold and soulless, began its inexorable countdown. 2. Every heartbeat echoed in the silence of the chamber, bringing the finale closer. 1. The officer's finger paused over the button to send the soul into oblivion. But what should have been a simple execution of the sentence turned out to be only the beginning of the nightmare recorded on this screen. Even now, looking at the footage of the past, Kang-ho felt a cold sweat run down to his bones. At that very fateful moment when life was about to end, the image on the monitor distorted, ripples swallowed reality, foreshadowing something terrible. The system crashed, but it was not just a technical failure but a harbinger of chaos. Panic gripped the guards when they realized the prisoner was no longer chained to the chair. Too late. Kang-ho's eyes reflected the bitter truth. He knew what to expect. The suicide bomber, his face twisted into a mad grin, was freed, and the drop of blood on his fingers seemed like an ominous omen. "Take cover!" A desperate cry could not stop the inevitable. A powerful impulse threw the guards away, their bodies spinning helplessly in the whirlwind of destruction. One of them, barely able to stand on his feet, wheezed into the radio. He unlocked the control device. "We need backup." But his pleas were drowned out by the noise of the battle, and his words were cut off before they reached their end. And then, a look. The last, terrified look of an officer caught in the clutches of a monster. And only a short, broken groan marked the end, leaving behind only a silent echo. But is this the end, or just the beginning of a new act, marked by a cruel smile and a dull blow? The officer's face contorted into a silent scream, reflecting the pain and absolute shock of the force that had fallen upon him. And the one who had been immobilized just a second ago was now sitting on the bloody floor, slowly turning to the defeated enemy. There was a wicked irony in his voice as he pointed out his obvious superiority, mocking the misfortune of others. The officer, mustering his last strength, tried to answer, his bloody hand convulsively clutching something on the ground. But his attempt was only a futile gesture, causing a new, rolling cry of agony. The monster showed no mercy, raining down blow after blow, turning the once strong man into a bloody mass. It wasn't tears that flowed from the officer's eyes, but blood, mixing with the dirt in his own life, which was rapidly leaving him. A figure in white towered over him, letting out a triumphant, mad laugh that echoed throughout the ruined space. The laughter only stopped to ask a question, full of mockery, demanding that he admit he was right. And while the officer knelt in his own blood, the monster announced his verdict, declaring the inevitability of punishment. In response, the officer shouted out something with his last strength that sounded like an echo, or perhaps a desperate protest against this monstrous trial. But words were useless. One precise, crushing blow, and everything ended in a bloody whirlwind. Only the officer's cap, torn from his head, slowly fell through the settling dust as the last reminder of life. Amidst the ruins and remnants of flesh, a figure in white raised its gaze, directed somewhere into the distance, towards the heights of the destroyed world. He seemed to think for a moment, his gaze becoming more focused, as if he were moving on to the next task. And a sinister smile blossomed on his face as he spoke the name, clearly marking his next victim or source of information. Meanwhile, somewhere in the distance, the man with that name felt a chill, and his eyes widened in anticipation of impending disaster. At that very moment, an ominous red light lit up in the depths of his pupil, foreshadowing an imminent confrontation. For this was not simply the beginning of a hunt, but the awakening of ancient forces gathered around their leader, ready for battle. And these awakened forces acted immediately, disabling all control devices on the suicide bombers, which caused the system to collapse. The escape was only miraculously prevented, but within Lucillus, in its dark depths, thousands of prison employees remained locked away. The alarm grew, and the question that came from the commander's lips was full of despair. Who is responsible for this outrage? The woman in front of him, with a pale face and a tense gaze, could only answer that the investigation was just beginning and there were no answers yet. And then, at the most inopportune moment, on the day of his brother's funeral, Hero Seo Kang-yu was called away to carry out another mission. With a heavy heart, she asked him for the impossible, to enter into the very hell and suppress the riot in the Lucillus prison. His answer was short and decisive, reflecting not a broken spirit but a hidden determination. For a moment, a calculating glint flashed in the woman's eyes, as if she foresaw something more than simply the suppression of a riot. But the hero, whose eyes now glowed with an ominous red flame, put forward his condition, which sent a chill down the spine. Meanwhile, chaos reigned in the Lucillus prison. Prisoners stormed the doors, their screams echoing through the corridors. The thirst for freedom turned into madness, and even among fellow prisoners, brutal reprisals broke out, erasing the last edges of humanity. And then, through the gaping passage, a figure appeared, surrounded by radiance, as if descending from heaven to decide destinies. The angry crowd, which just a moment ago had trampled on all laws, now shouted for justice, demanding a trial. The doors swung open, promising long-awaited freedom, and hundreds of prisoners rushed out into the light, not knowing what awaited them there. But instead of freedom, they were met by an abyss. An invisible force picked them up and threw them down into zero gravity. The prisoners' faces twisted in horror and confusion as they realized their escape had turned into a fall. And above them, in a halo of light, he towered, a hero, but no longer the one they knew, looking at this carnage with cold calm. And his voice rang through the air, proclaiming that he had not come as a savior, he had not come as a hero, but as something else. He introduced himself as Prison Officer Seo Kang-yu, and there was no pity or hope in his words, only anticipation of the inevitable end. The recognition of his name, Seo Kang-yu, was a death sentence for them, causing their blood to run cold with the realization of their true situation. The questions hung in the air like a haze of madness as they stared at his form, unsure of what was happening. But some didn't care. Their insane anger demanded only blood, thirsted for a clash. The cry of, "Kill him!" echoed through the dark walls, and a crowd of monsters rushed forward, driven by fury. Seo Kang-yu stood motionless, the picture of calm in the center of raging hatred. Fists, twisted with rage, fell upon him, but he was faster, more deadly. With lightning speed, his body turned into a weapon, every movement a fatal blow. The air around him trembled with force, and the thrown bodies fell to the ground, broken and lifeless. Their cries of pain were drowned out by the roar of the carnage as the dead multiplied at his feet. Soon, a mountain of bodies formed around him, and the survivors looked on in horror and disbelief. Who is this man? This question pierced the consciousness of those who survived with cold horror. But he only adjusted his collar slightly, and his indifferent grin suggested that this was only the beginning. "Scum, listen carefully," he said, his voice ringing through the hall, carrying the message of what was to come. The government made a decision, and the execution was to begin, from the first floor, from the solitary confinement cells. Then it will be the turn of the first underground level, where the others were hiding. And the second one, harboring even more dangerous inhabitants. The third and fourth levels are abysses, full of monstrous secrets. And finally, the deepest, fifth underground level, which kept the darkest secrets. "I'll take charge," continued another figure, emerging from the shadows, sitting on a mountain of corpses. She greeted him with a mad grin, as if it were a game, announcing that she had accepted her older brother's responsibilities. And from his words, from his red blazing eyes, came the final sentence, "Let the execution begin." And what does that mean? A piercing cry of despair and rage echoed through the silence, foreshadowing the rebellion brewing in the souls of the doomed. "You fucking bastard, what are you planning? Are you trying to kill us?" comes from the crowd, where everyone senses the inevitable end approaching. Kong Lim, unwavering, looks down at them, his voice cold as steel, piercing their hearts. "Do you really think you don't deserve to die after killing so many people?" These words make the crowd freeze, but only for a moment, because the accusations are too serious to swallow without a fight. One of them, named Kalita, with a mad glint in his eyes, snaps back furiously, claiming that his list of victims is not so long, only a dozen souls. Brooks, the second criminal, echoes him, pointing out that he is only responsible for 7 murders, as if that could mitigate their fate, and Cade believes that his actions, including kidnapping, rape, and murder, are too insignificant for such a harsh punishment. "Who are you to decide our fate?" comes another cry, and the crowd begins to move again, their anger mixing with panic. "We're people too. Call us a lawyer." Hundreds of voices join in a single desperate cry, trying to appeal to a non-existent justice. King Lim just sighs deeply. The noise is becoming unbearable, and his patience seems to be running out. A familiar figure stands out in this chaotic mass, Choi Gu-wan, whose biography is no less dark than the others, and he himself seems completely calm. He weighs his chances with a sly grin, convinced that he can escape this carnage. His gaze slid over Kang Lim, assessing his opponent, and he saw only the opportunity that was opening up to him at that moment. Gu Wan makes a sudden move. His goal is to escape, and he is ready to seize any opportunity. But before he can take a step, the space around him is distorted, pierced by flashes of incredible energy. Something invisible, yet tangible, permeates the crowd, and a bright blue light cuts through the air, causing everyone to freeze. Kang Lim stands with his back to them, radiating power that envelops everything around him, creating an aura of inhuman strength. His face is tense, and his eyes glow with a piercing blue light, foreshadowing the storm that is about to fall upon everyone. This surge of energy distracts Guwan. He understands that this is his only chance, but at the same time, it is a huge danger. And the next moment, the ground beneath their feet trembles. Blood-red lightning pierces the air, heralding the beginning of a true, merciless execution. And then the realization, crushing like a granite slab, is reflected in their eyes, wide with horror. But Guwan, as if not noticing the growing tension, speaks calmly, almost casually, offering a choice. He offers 2 paths, each tinged with a shadow of hopelessness. The first is to return to the cells, put the shackles back on, and meekly await his sentence. The second is to fall by his hand here and now, meeting death without delay. One of the convicts, unable to bear it any longer, shouts out in rage that there really is no choice. If death is inevitable, it is better to meet it in battle, trying to break free, than to meekly go to execution. For them, this is not a negotiation, but merely a mockery that prolongs the inevitable end. But Guwan responds with cold serenity, calling his words mercy, the last thing he can offer them. The crowd is gripped by panic. Some see this as a chance to prolong the agony. Others recognize in Guwan the very same hero from Equality, whose presence here bodes ill. And one of them, overcome with horror, makes a decision that seems saving, to activate the control device in order to regain his power. His face contorts into a grimace of pain and despair as an eerie light erupts from his mouth, illuminating the space with a deathly green glow. The other captives stand frozen in shock as they watch their comrade's transformation, while Guwan waits calmly, showing no sign of concern. The one who decided to do this raises his hand, as if asking for something. Now he looks at Guwan in a completely different way, as an equal, without fear. He recalls their past exploits, boasting about how they managed to defeat a second-rank hero thanks to their coordinated work. These words light a spark of hope in the eyes of others, awakening in them a predatory, insane gleam. He grins, his eyes blazing with a mad determination, and he assures the others that they have nothing to fear. He calls on them all to work together to finish off Guwan and break out of captivity. Guwan looks back at him, his face unreadable, but his eyes reveal a deep, hidden thought. And then the voiceover reminds us of the horrifying truth. Lucullus Prison is home to 300 or more serial killers, those who knew no mercy. The narrator reveals the scale of the threat. The first underground floor alone contains hundreds of those who have defied entire cities. As we delve deeper, we learn of more than 30 whose actions threatened megacities. And on the third floor, only 10 languish, but their sins could consume entire nations. And only 5, the pinnacle of this horror, are confined to the fourth, each of them capable of shaking continents. These figures are just dry facts, but they paint a chilling picture of boundless evil concentrated in one place. However, Warden reassured Guwan with a slight smile. Isn't that too many? The ones you'll actually encounter will be far fewer. Then she utters a word that echoes through the fear-filled corridors, prisoners. And then, in the middle of the crowd, we see 2 strange children waving their hands like children as if they were playing in the middle of hell. Their voices, almost inaudible, call out, "Repent of your sins." And in the distance, among the fallen bodies, in dazzling white, sits a girl whose name is Bei. Guwan looks at her, at this dark fruit in her hands, and feels something strangely familiar. Warden explains that the two, like most of the people here, are hostile to each other. But Guwan is surprised, as he thought he was all alone here. The girl's smile becomes frightening, hiding something sinister and deeply predatory behind its innocence. And then Varden reveals the main intrigue. These predators, these monsters, have united around one man. His name is Gilisona, and his face is forever inscribed in the Chronicle of Madness. He has a unique skill that can change the course of any battle. He grants superhuman strength to his allies, using only the sounds he makes. Warden recalls his bloody past, an attack on a hospital with 30 accomplices, 7 killed. Together with the second-rank hero nicknamed Hayes, this makes 8 victims and then 10 altogether. In a mad laugh, Gilisona reveals the true reason the slut they killed was carrying twins, leaving Guwan speechless with horror. Guwan looks at the laughing killers, his mind refusing to accept the monstrous truth, which doubles the number of victims. He realizes that words are powerless, and determination lights up in his eyes. Violence has become the only language these creatures understand. But Gilson only grins, knowing the inviolability of his fortress, and confident that even the most desperate attempts will be in vain. Then Guwan, with a red fire in his eyes, snapped his fingers, releasing the power he had been holding back until now. Gilison's face is distorted by a mixture of madness and anticipation of bloody retribution. The gloating crowd reminds Guwan of his own sins, of the choice he made to sacrifice his allies for the sake of the goal. And in this mad laughter, Gilison pronounces his sentence, "We will send you to your friends," the mortal threat echoes. Red energy flares around Gilison, his body distorting into a monstrous, primal power. The other prisoners, intoxicated with the anticipation of the massacre, echo his laughter, ready to tear their victim to pieces. He feels an uncontrollable power overflowing through him, giving him a feeling of absolute dominance. His face distorted with rage, he lets out one last, deafening cry. Charge, and the mad crowd, engulfed in red flame, rushes towards Guwan with a wild roar. But Guwan didn't flinch. A crimson beam erupted from his fist, cutting through the air and time. The blow passes through the first attackers, and their bodies, like puppets, fly to the sides, irrigating the floor with a red shroud. Gilison's face distorts with a cry of pain and shock. This force turned out to be completely different. His attack sweeps through the ranks, knocking down one after another, leaving only horror and confusion in its wake. What is this power? His eyes widen in realization of his own sudden helplessness. The entire horde is defeated, lying lifeless bodies, and only Gilison remains standing, unable to believe what is happening. Guwan's shadow towers over the battlefield, his aura pulsing with unbridled, murderous energy. And all who ever mocked him now lie at his feet, testifying to his boundless, destructive power. Guwan unleashes his might, crimson energy tearing through space, incinerating everything in its path. But somewhere in the distance, beyond the walls of the silent city, the echo of this massacre is barely perceptible. In the cold corridors, flooded with blue light, a certain prisoner sits, sensing uneasiness. A man in a straight mask, trapped in his solitude, suddenly senses something is wrong. His eyes, full of anxiety, widen with a premonition of impending disaster. The mask can't hold back his scream as an unknown horror pierces every cell of his body. And now he is already in general agony, in a crowd desperately shouting, "What the fuck?" A tear rolls down his cheek, reflecting the nightmare he now not only feels, but sees. After all, this is Guwan, and his blood-red threads of fate are already reaching out to everyone. Bodies are twisted and thrown like puppets in a whirlwind of unbridled, primal force. His gaze is stern, and the words "initial" appear above him. The victims beg, stop, but their pleas only fuel the relentless storm. Stop! Echoes across the field, which has become a bloody palette of his anger. Regime, the inscription adds, announcing the full release of his power. Dozens of bodies float in the air, caught in a deadly web of scarlet threads. Gu Wan stands amidst this chaos, his figure the embodiment of destruction. Every movement of his power is a sentence, tearing apart flesh and bone. Ah, one of them breathes out, his body no longer his own. It's impossible, whispers another, looking into the abyss where only Gu Wan reigns. And he looks around his creation, a field of death, drenched in blood and despair, with a cold, detached gaze. And Gu Wan, like the Grim Reaper, towers over this killing field. This is just the first floor, the first circle of hell that he created. The execution is complete, but not the revenge. In his eyes there is only cold steel and the flame of hatred inherited from those who fell. These mountains of corpses are only the beginning of his journey. Tens? Hundreds? How many more lives will it take to satisfy this thirst for justice? Once again he appears before the captives, offering them a choice. Put on this device, he says, or meet your death. But not everyone is ready to give in. One of them, blazing with rage, rushes forward. In an instant, red threads pierce the air, throwing the attacker away like an unwanted rag doll. Horror freezes in the eyes of the survivor. He realizes that 300 people on this floor have already fallen at the hands of Guwan. Trembling all over, he falls to his knees, begging for mercy and promising to submit. Come and get it, Guwan orders quietly, his voice ominous. A frightened man stretches out his hands, begging for salvation, not knowing that it is a trap. But a mad gleam suddenly flashed in the prisoner's eyes, and he, accumulating purple energy, rushed at Guwan, cursing him. A lightning bolt filled with hatred shakes the air. "Did you really think I would follow you, you bastard?" he screams in impotent rage. Guwan just smirked, remembering the words of one of the villains caught by the one called Tomio. Tomio, bound in chains, said with disdain, "Those who lack physical ability are truly pitiful. Tomio belongs to equality." And with a mad smile, she added, "You don't know what a wonderful feeling it is to hit a person with your own hands. You only shoot heads from a distance, don't you?" That's right, that wonderful feeling. It seems to flash through his head. Breaking enemies like eggshells with your own hands, enjoying every crunch and crack. While the bloody symphony unfolded in the distance, the guard, unsuspecting, approached the locked doors. And when they swung open, a silhouette in the bright light announced a new chapter in this terrible story. "It's too noisy outside," the stranger whispered, his gaze, full of ancient weariness, turning towards the source of the chaos. It was him, the one he had once known, a figure that exuded mortal menace and ancient hatred. "It's been 3 years, can you?" Filder's voice, full of venom, pierced the silence. "Long time no see, hero." The first-floor prisoner, Chalk Fielder, was a cannibal and sadist whose name was synonymous with horror. "I thought you'd quit that job," he continued, looking at the Guardian mockingly. Kang Yu, with his blazing eyes, did not flinch. "Choose, put on the limiter, or die right now." But Fielder only smiled madly. "If I had known that our meeting would be like this." His words echoed painfully, taking Kang Yu back to the days when he himself was a captive. By that day, helpless, he was chained to a pole while his comrades merely watched. And this terrible cauldron, filled with an unholy meal, is an eternal reminder of the monstrosity of Fielder. "It looks delicious, right?" The mocking question was like a knife piercing Kang Yu's heart. "So, now you want to kill me?" Fielder, his face distorted with madness, challenged fate. And then, deep in the Guardian's soul, that very red fire that foreshadowed a storm flared up. His fist, engulfed in dark energy, clenched, preparing to unleash a punishment that would have no equal. "I will kill you," came the cold promise, echoing through the space. And with that oath, a crushing force was unleashed, driving him towards bloody retribution. A furious cry burst from his chest, scorching the air with the flames of vengeance. He saw, there, among the ruins, his comrade was chained to a post, tortured, his flesh lacerated by crimson fetters. "No," whispered a female voice full of despair, her eyes reflecting the full horror of what was happening. The monstrous figure taunted, saying that the hunter's companions were only dissatisfied with his capture, not his death. The hunter stood surrounded by a red aura of power, and his words were colder than ice. Any silence would be seen as a choice of death. But the villain only grinned mockingly, asking about the reasons for his brutal murders. The hunter didn't listen. His movements were lightning fast, and his words were a sharp refusal of senseless explanations. And the madman, shrouded in a purple glow, began his confession, whispering about his desire to be forever imprinted in the memories of his victims. His face twisted into a devilish grimace. "That's why I killed them," he continued, as the hunter watched this twisted manifestation of evil intently. A picture of torment appeared before my eyes, the distorted cries of the unfortunate, surrounded by fluttering butterflies. "They will not be able to forget me," the villain declared, and the tears of his victims flowed down his imaginary wings. Endless faces of terror and floating figures, forever trapped in his purple illusion. "I will be forever imprinted in their eyes," his mad cry sounded, from which the blood ran cold. This was his true power, the ability, hallucination, the name of which was written in madness itself. And, as proof, he offered the hunter to see the memory of any of his killed, returning to them the moment of agony. A familiar figure emerged from the purple haze, a tied-up man, the very same child, as the villain called him. Suffering and pain pierced the image of the ghost, reliving its last moments. Seeing this, the villain mockingly suggested that the hunter had become weakened after spending time in solitary confinement. But the hunter did not flinch. His fist clenched, and the scarlet energy of power flared up again, preparing to deliver the decisive blow. The villain continued to taunt him, asking why the hunter didn't dodge his attacks. But the hunter didn't seem to be thinking of answering, instead asking his question before it was all over. Does the villain remember those whom he cold-bloodedly took the lives of along the way, those who fell by his hand? The only response was a contemptuous snort, worthless trash, not worth even a moment of memory. And then, a purple light flashed across the arena, distorting reality and summoning shadows of the past. There they were, the hunter's fallen comrades, their silent faces emerging from the shimmering haze. His gaze filled with pain, and the companion next to him seemed to sense their grief as well. Ghostly shadows reached out to him, whispering his name, as if trying to reach his very soul. The villain, triumphant, twisted his mouth into a terrible grin, enjoying the spectacle of others suffering. Nightmarish phantoms of the dead surrounded the hunter, trying to drag him into the abyss of despair. Even the image of the one he had sworn to protect spoke to him, filled with silent sorrow. But the hunter's will was unbreakable. A scarlet whirlwind of power surged up, cutting through the illusions that bound him. "Are you done with your cheap tricks?" his voice sounded, full of cold determination. The villain's grin faltered, and a drop of cold sweat rolled down his forehead. The next moment, the villain was surrounded by the ghosts of his own comrades, cut to pieces by the same scarlet energy. "It can't be," he whispered, trying to comprehend what was happening. His eyes widened in horror as he realized the monstrous deception. Is all this just a mind game, a simple illusion? The hunter, without a second's hesitation, unleashed a furious barrage of blows on the villain. A powerful hook threw the opponent back, leaving him stunned and completely bewildered. The hunter, without a moment's hesitation, unleashed a furious barrage of blows on the villain. A powerful hook sent his opponent reeling, leaving him stunned and completely bewildered. In a battered but unbroken mind, the warden clung desperately to his new role, rejecting the past. But even from the broken lips of the defeated enemy, a defiant whisper escaped, rejecting this pathetic self-deception. A purple light flickered deep within the villain's darkened pupil as he delivered his verdict. An ominous purple aura was already gathering around the warden, foreshadowing his true, terrifying nature. The ominous truth, voiced by the wounded man, pierced him, comparing him to the one whose name itself was a curse, Huang Sang Huan. The face of the defeated villain, distorted with pain, froze in a silent accusation that echoed throughout the area. The warden's red-rimmed eyes flashed as he was confronted with the reflection of his own darkness. Somewhere above, in the shadow of the colossal structures, Seo Kangyu watched the unfolding drama, her gaze filled with horror. She noted with bitterness the absolute lack of resistance, as if fate itself had accepted its terrible sentence. The silence around her was filled only with her own unspoken thoughts. Her heart was squeezed by a painful question: when would the hour come when she would finally come down and intervene? Her gaze wandered over the abyss, where below, like a tiny figure, hope froze, awaiting her descent. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a mysterious group watched the pulsating purple artifact, preparing for their unknown plans. One of them, with a predatory grin, turned to a certain Lady Sinka, waiting for the command to begin, while the other, surprised, confirmed the presence of his. And then, from the shadows, she emerged. Lady Sinka, her eyes glowing with an ominous purple light, full of anticipation. Startled by her appearance, the warden only heard a question fly from her lips that sounded like an echo from a completely different life. Hubby? Sinka, unable to hide her wild delight, burst into laughter, confirming this shocking connection. Assistant Canis, his face distorted with bewilderment, tried to clarify, wasn't her hubby that same Huang Songhuan? But Kato, another of the retinue, retorted with cold confidence, reminding Shinka that all their actions were only for the sake of saving him. The girl, with a frightening smile, mockingly declared him a hero, once perhaps, but now just a useless burden on humanity. She bowed her head, challengingly asking if there was any trace of his former glory left in this tormented man. Warden Kong Yu stood there, his gaze heavy and impenetrable, his words frozen on his lips. Canis and Kato surrounded her like faithful shadows as she playfully and cruelly presented them with a dilemma where polyandry was forbidden, or perhaps it's all much simpler. The one who survives this merciless game will become her destiny, was her twisted verdict. And so, under her mad gaze, the fate of two people froze. Later, amidst the corpses and destruction, Kato casually praised Overseer Kan Yu. His task was accomplished with alarming efficiency. The first floor of the prison was completely cleared of rioters. She warned him of the growing danger in the lower levels, offering him a brief respite. But Kan Yu was adamant, his determination tireless. He moved forward, not wanting to waste a second. Kato just sighed resignedly and ordered the doors to the next level to be opened. But before he left, she had one request. On the second underground floor, the still-living guards were giving weak signals, their lives hanging by a thread. Kato asked him not just to survive, but to help the remaining guards return to their families. When Kan Yu asked about the number of survivors, she only shrugged her shoulders, admitting that the connection had been cut off on all floors below the first. The bloody echoes of the battle came from below, echoing the wheezing of the dying. The sounds from below became clearer, the death rattles of the monsters, their desperate attempts to resist. Loud bangs shook the building itself, as if an abyss had opened up beneath their feet. Every explosion, every shot gave off a red glow, breaking through the walls. Kang Yu, looking at the flickering camera lens, only smiled mockingly. "You are hoping in vain that someone is watching you," his gaze seemed to say. One of the guards, following orders, requested that the door to the first underground level be opened. Kan Yu's assistant, with visible irritation, gave permission, knowing what was in store for them. "Be careful, Kan Yu," she warned. "The difference in strength between the prisoners here and there is colossal." Like heaven and earth, fate itself confirmed her fears as Kan Yu walked deeper into the corridor. His silhouette, shrouded in a crimson glow, foreshadowed a swift and merciless judgment. But he was not the only one who led the battle, whose fists crushed enemies with unstoppable power. Somewhere in the depths of the prison, giants were fighting, and the triumphant roar of, "The fastest one wins, you son of a bitch," echoed through the corridors. "Shoot them! We were expecting you. Did you think we weren't prepared?" came the cries, full of fury and self-confidence. Suddenly, her figure appeared on the horizon of the battle, causing the enemy to cry out in surprise. Could it be the head of the overseers? A powerful palm easily closed around her neck, lifting her into the air. The monster leader chuckled, his gaze full of greedy anticipation. "Boss, what luck, what a big catch!" He reveled in his victory. His eyes were blazing with madness. "I've always dreamed of crushing that arrogant face. Is this really my chance?" the monster rejoiced, looking at the helpless woman. And around them, in a blood-red haze, lay the bodies of the fallen, while he threw her at the feet of his subordinates, declaring, "Hey, idiots, this is the chief of the overseers herself." A curtain of blood enveloped everything around, and the force of the impact scattered the debris like dust. Thrown by a merciless force, she crashed into the ground, shaking it with her fall. Even the head overseer, exhausted and bloodied, tried to rise through pain and confusion. But someone's voice, full of alarm, warned her, as if trying to stop the inevitable. "Don't go down to the second underground floor," he repeated, emerging from the bloody haze. "It's dangerous." With pain in her eyes, she only nodded weakly, accepting his words. It was Overseer Seo Kangyu, standing before her like a ghost of hope. He revealed his plan. On the first floor is Tomoki, who was captured by Tome. Her eyes showed an understanding of the gravity of the situation, as if every syllable he uttered was a blow. Warden Seo Kangyu looked forward with determination, ready to face any danger. Meanwhile, in the solitary confinement cells of the first underground floor, the prisoners felt a dull rumble. "Stupid freaks," the one who held them in her chains said with a sly smile. She asked mockingly if they really thought their pathetic attempts could cause such a fuss. It turned out that someone had disobeyed her orders, and it was Tomoki, the killer of the 28 heroes. She sneered and wondered why former heroes became villains. It's simple, they're stupid. Meanwhile, one of the prisoners, the mighty Tomoki, addressed her with a threat. You want to kill me? Ha ha, kill me! Her laughter sounded like a challenge to death itself. She dismissed their achievements with disdain, claiming that they only killed ordinary people, not those with true power. For your information, I've already fought with such people. That's why I ended up here, she said, not hiding her superiority. And, demonstrating her skill, she declared that she could easily destroy a person with abilities, while Tomoki began to show his terrifying power. His body broke and was reborn, releasing pent-up rage. From the depths of his being, only one primal roar escaped, ILL kill. But her smile didn't waver, it only widened as she challenged, so which of us will be the hunter and who will be the hunted? You worthless nobody, she whispered disdainfully, as if addressing a lost animal. She recalled the days of her former glory, when, as a hero, she brought justice to countless villains. But it was then that she learned the true art, hunting those who possessed power comparable to her own. Ironically, it was this skill that led her to kill many heroes in cold blood. Her gaze pierced, offering a dark partnership. Join me, and I will open new horizons for you. A bloody grin played on her lips, promising forbidden knowledge. I will teach you how to mercilessly hunt down those who dare to call themselves gifted, she said. Tomoki, as if not noticing her words, slowly moved away, his back holding an unsolved secret. But his eyes burned with a scarlet fire, and he answered defiantly, I know something else. She chuckled in anticipation of his answer, her aura pulsing with purple light. And in the midst of the carnage, she reminded him, I was a hero once too, you know? And it was this past that gave her invaluable knowledge about everyone who bears this title. But what difference will knowing their powers make? He asked, looking at her with insight hidden behind his mask. She explained that the Equality Elite, the first-rank heroes, were incomparable to someone of Tomoki's level. Her low laughter echoed through the space, foreshadowing something ominous. She was immersed in memories of Laos, who became the head of Equality and changed the world of heroes forever. Laos redefined the very concept of a hero, banning them from taking the lives of even the most notorious villains. She, Laos, whose name was once synonymous with coup, now assesses the strength of a new adversary, and although she had not personally seen him in combat, his deeds on the first floor of the prison, where the scum are kept, speak of considerable power. This is enough to call him a hero of at least the second rank. With a cold smile, Laosa addresses the assembled group, placing his hopes on them. Here is Choi Mok-gang, who killed 1,738 people, and next to him is Hong Hye, whose hands are stained with the blood of 1,983 victims. Next, Kuriel, who has exterminated 2,070 souls, and Mido Chan, who is responsible for 3,421 deaths, are ready to restore order. Or not? Laos's gaze settles on Speech, the deadliest of them all, responsible for 6,435 deaths. She didn't deny Seo Kang-yu's strength. On the contrary, she acknowledged his power, but there was an ominous understatement in her words. With a devilish grin, Laos announces that he knows his weakness, and it is time to begin the hunt. Do you know his weakness? Speech's voice is filled with wariness and curiosity. Laosa doesn't lose her cool, urging the prisoners to act faster, as there won't be any better options. Tension mounts as word of an approaching enemy spreads through the corridors. Intrigued by the possibility of a bloodbath, the prisoners, one by one, begin to raise their hands. Laosa's gaze pierces Speech, the most dangerous of them, and her question hangs in the air. And you? After a brief moment of heavy silence, he agrees, taking up the challenge. I'm in too. The world they exist in changed many centuries ago when humanity gained supernatural abilities. Scientists have divided them into 3 categories: physical, transformative, and body-enhancing. Then magical ones, releasing destructive elements or granting mysterious spells. And finally, special abilities, unique, incomprehensible gifts that do not fit into any of the usual classifications. Electric shocks begin to dance around Speech, while Laos, looking him straight in the eyes, asks if he feels him, to which he receives a laconic answer, I see. I see, came the reply, as Speech's own power flared around him, a physical ability that allowed him to interact with the world around him through brainwave communication. He felt every vibration, every impulse, and he realized that his gift, this powerful physical ability, was remarkably similar to what he had felt in Laos. But Tomoki had a different opinion. She believed she had figured out Speech's greatest weakness, knowing something others didn't. Her confidence was fueled by long-ago memories of watching his grueling training as a hero. She saw him fight HR-12, a powerful robot capable of entering combat training mode and delivering blows of unimaginable force. Speech, standing before the prisoners, wasted no time in persuasion, offering only two choices: accept the control device or face immediate death. There was a cold, calculating gleam in his eyes that hid an unwavering will and ruthless determination. And as soon as he finished speaking, a powerful purple energy began to dance around him, a harbinger of an approaching storm. One of the prisoners, with a mad grin, couldn't believe his eyes. Speech didn't even try to dodge their attacks. Then he himself rushed into battle, concentrating dark energy in his palm, preparing to deliver a crushing blow to the seemingly defenseless target. At this moment, Tomoki, using the sturdy prison door as a reliable cover, watched the events unfold. The other prisoners, following her plan, unleashed a barrage of their creative and special abilities on Speech, creating a blinding flash of chaos. "We did as you said," she said with satisfaction, watching her plan begin to come to fruition. But there was something Tomoki hadn't taken into account. Speech didn't need to dodge, as these attacks couldn't harm him. He stood in the midst of the raging energy storm, untouched, emitting a red glow of absolute invulnerability. That was why Tomoki had been cautiously keeping her distance, preparing for an attack that could hit him from afar. But beyond that, she introduced another, hidden variable into her plan, something that began to wrap itself around Speech in dark tendrils. Dark, shadow-like forces gripped him, for the first time forcing his body to resist the invisible shackles. The source of this new threat was a malevolent prisoner who was directing streams of shadow energy directly at Speech. "But will it be effective in controlling the entire basement?" he asked, but Tomoki only calmly replied, "It's fine." Tomoki explained that several such devices would be enough to contain even 10 third-rank heroes on a single floor, and 15 devices are capable of completely sealing and suppressing all the abilities of any first-rank hero. She then turned to Million, asking if he could lock them onto a target remotely during an attack. He only bared his teeth, immediately confirming his readiness. Million's ability, whose hands were stained with the blood of over 2,000 victims, was to perfectly attach sights to any object. A sly grin once again distorted Tomoki's face, because all these measures were only just in case and, of course, for their own safety. "Attach 30 devices to him," she said coldly, pointing at Speech. The prisoners rejoiced maliciously, convinced that the officer's fate was now sealed. But they didn't know that Tomoki's seemingly flawless strategy contained 3 fatal mistakes. Suddenly, Speech's form burst open, and streams of crimson energy erupted from underneath it. His body began to transform, shrouded in an ominous red glow. This was Tomoki's first mistake. Speech struck, and a devastating shockwave swept through the room. The smiles on the prisoners' faces instantly turned to genuine horror and bewilderment. The power that Speech exuded was truly unimaginable. His strength far exceeded that of even the most powerful first-rank heroes. Million writhed in agony as blue bolts crackled around his head, destroying the control devices. The devices that were supposed to bind him were destroyed in an instant. Tomoki's eyes were filled with pure shock. "How is this possible?" she silently asked herself. And then the dungeon was shaken by a piercing cry, full of inhuman rage. And immediately the invisible rage took the form of crimson threads, tearing through flesh and metal. It was not just rage, but the realization of a fatal second mistake. In the epicenter of the bloody storm he stood, cold and inescapable, directing his merciless will with only a gesture. The blow was physical, yes, it was noticeable, but no one could have imagined that it had such power. The battlefield turned into a bloody mess, confirming that they were facing not just any enemy, but something from a completely special category. Panic gripped those who remained. What now? Not a single control device worked. Despair was evident in every word. From the depths of the corridor came a calling cry. "Hey!" An attempt to gather the remnants of will. With a mad gleam in his eyes, the order came. Turn on the controller, immediately. And even at the cost of his own life, just to stop this madness. One of them, gathering his last strength, rushed into battle, trying to break through the curtain of bloody energy. But the insane force was already drawing him into its whirlpool, turning the world into a red spiral of doom. And now the crimson threads reached out to them, to those who stood frozen in numbness behind the seemingly reliable barriers. Their gazes met his, filled with an icy fury that made the very air around him seem to burn. But it was too late. The dungeon shook from a new, blinding blue flash. It pierced everything through and through, leaving behind only horror and a premonition of an imminent end. His cry, full of despair, broke the silence, expressing the full extent of the catastrophe. "This is fucked." Accusations rained down on Tomoki. What is this? He simply destroyed us. Where is your plan? But she only silently repeated to herself, this can't be. He continued furiously, hey, say something. You deceived us. And she, as if in a trance, kept repeating in her head, none of the 30 control devices worked? When he tried to take command to give them another chance, Tomoki's cold inner voice already told him to shut up. And before he could utter another word, her own rage erupted, painting the scene in bloody spray and a loud, shut the fuck up. Her victim, a first-rank hero, was defeated, and that was more than enough to seal even his powerful ability. But how could one man break all these limitations? And if he was so strong, why did he never show it? Rage tore at her from within, transforming her appearance as Tomoki rose above the bloody spray, her essence distorted. The surviving officer, realizing the full depth of his mistake, tried to crawl away, looking in horror at the transformed woman. A desperate cry for help rang out in the hall as he begged for salvation, but Tomoki was no longer listening, her gaze fixed on him. Her hand, now part of the monstrous armor, emitted a shimmering blue light, ready to unleash its power. Tomoki's deadly figure approached, and the officer covered his face with his hands, trying to hide from the inevitable. However, the officer did not flinch, only clasping his hand to his chest when Tomoki, with a creepy grin, appeared before him in all her demonic glory. Tomoki the hero, he said, as if trying to grasp hold of the elusive past. But he quickly corrected himself. No, Death Eater Tomoki. Will you say your last words? To which she only laughed, suggesting that he himself should go to hell. Is that your last word? He asked calmly, like an imperturbable executioner. With a grim smile, Tomoki confirmed that all the equality heroes except her were dead. Yes, the officer chuckled, his face hidden in shadow. I see. But then he asked a question that made Tomoki freeze. Does that mean Tome is dead too? Fury flared in her eyes again, and the shadow of a bound figure flashed behind her. A heavy silence fell, filled with unspoken words and a premonition of trouble. Heh, so it's true, the officer finally said, realizing the scale of the tragedy. Tomoki, with a new, creepy grin, merely shook her head, remembering how she herself had told her sister that heroism never leads to anything good. Oh, that stupid little sister. You belong to equalities, but you kill people? Do the other heroes know about this? His voice was full of hidden meaning. You know how Lausa tried to change the hero industry, he continued, but because of you, everything will go back to normal. Don't you think that will upset her? For the truth was harsh, the hero industry, in its current form, could never be considered normal. This is exactly the conclusion Tomoki came to when she put on the hero's cloak. After all, the justice meted out by heroes often turned out to be only imaginary, covering up much darker truths. When people cried out for help on the city streets, and someone's life hung in the balance, the tension was growing, and every second could be the last. Then a hero would appear, swift as lightning, called upon to restore order. And the villain fell, defeated, but the price of this salvation was sometimes terrifying. For the system, the main thing was mission completed. Even if an innocent person died in the process, the hero's status remained unshakable. But Tomoki chose this path for an entirely different reason, one born of deep affection. Her younger sister, Tome, saw her as an ideal, something more than just a relative. You're so cool, just like a real hero, Tome admired, naively believing in the pure image. Tome, lacking abilities, always looked to her strong older sister for protection and support. And Tomoki, in response, strove to justify this trust, to become the person her sister saw in her. But the one Tome considered a hero was not at all that ideal, and this could not be normal. Having become a hero, Tomoki was immersed in a world where the lines between good and evil were blurred. She saved lives, hearing words of gratitude from those who were on the brink. But inside Tomoki, there was no pride, no true compassion, only a cold fulfillment of duty. The smile was false, concealing a snaking sense of superiority over the weak. And then one day, during another act of heroism, Tomoki committed her first murder. At that moment, when life left the villain's body, she knew that very pure, unalloyed superiority. And in those tears, mixed with mad joy, a whisper sounded. Murder, it is so enlivening. It revives, she whispered, enjoying every moment, especially when those who were once called heroes but turned out to be weaker, fell before her. In the pouring rain and the light of flickering streetlights, her victim slowly died, bleeding out on the dirty asphalt. Shock, betrayal, despair, all of it was fuel for her own mad bliss that shone in her eyes. A muffled cry, a plea for mercy, burst from the chest of a broken man, was drowned out by the noise of the rain. His face, distorted with horror and tears, became the most desirable sight for her. At that moment, Tomoki completely lost her mind, consumed by the darkness that lurked within. But her madness did not go unnoticed. Tome, her sister, saw blood on her clothes, her strange return home, and one day decided to follow her. Tommy cringed at what she saw, her eyes widening in a silent scream of horror. She saw it with her own eyes. Her own sister, surrounded by dead bodies, was committing a monstrous massacre. "Sister? Tome?" she whispered, trying to reach the one she knew. "I told you, it's too late," Tomoki replied, and there was no trace of the previous affection in her voice. Her smile was cold as a blade. "Well, I guess nothing can be done about it now." And then came the monstrous, blood-curdling offer. "Want to join?" "What?" was all Tomei could manage to squeeze out, her world crumbling before her eyes. "If not, I'll do it myself," Tomoki growled, her smile growing even wider, even crazier. Tommy's eyes reflected not only grief, but also the awakening strength that had burst forth from the depths of despair. In that fateful moment, purple chains danced around her, proclaiming the awakening of her own, terrifying ability. Thus, through pain and betrayal, Tome awakened her power, and her first heroic mission was to put an end to her own sister. "Sister!" was all she could whisper, doomed to an eternal struggle with the soul dearest to her. So Tomei became the heroine, and Tomoki became the villain, and their paths, once crossed in love, now converged in a deadly fight. "I'm taking you into custody." Tomoki greets his sister with a cold smile, noting her increased strength, but immediately adds, "It's so sad that you don't call me sister anymore, and I even feel sorry for you." She mockingly mentions Tome's creative abilities, contrasting them with her dark, destructive nature. True strength, she believes, comes from physical superiority, not from invisible magic. Those who avoid direct contact will never know the true, all-consuming sense of control that Tomoki craves. The feeling when you break someone's will, someone's life with your own hands. That's where the real pleasure lies, isn't it? But Tome, gritting her teeth, snaps, "You can't understand me." Her eyes burn with rage and contempt for her sister's madness. She looks at Tomoki, trying to find in her at least an echo of the former tenderness, the former kindred soul. But in response, she receives only a devilish grin and the sight of a distorted hand consumed by darkness, which has become her true reflection. Suddenly, Tomoki is plunged into memories. The image of the one who fell flashes in her mind. Did Tome really die without suffering? This question echoes in her soul, sounding like a mockery of loss. A painful memory flashes before her eyes. Tommy, bleeding, lying helplessly in her death throes. Tom Ye, defeated in a brutal battle with Huang Songquan, fell, but her pain did not go away without a trace. A face distorted with pain, tears mixing with blood, the last desperate realization burned into the memory. A dying whisper, a plea for salvation, which Tomoki seemed to have ignored at the time. She was dying, waiting for you to come to her aid. These words pierced Tome like a blade, reminding her of the irreparable. Tomoki freezes, struck by the sudden weight of realization, her gaze empty and cold as death itself. A dark energy erupts from her corrupted hand. This question has awakened the beast sleeping deep within her. Now the darkness consumes her completely, transforming her appearance, preparing her for a merciless, deadly attack. Her mind darkened, and with a wild cry, "I'm even worse," she rushes forward, armed with a sharp blade. The blade flashes through the air and pierces Tome, causing her to cry out in excruciating, unbearable pain. Blood gushed from Tomei's mouth, drowning out her scream of agony that pierced every cell of her body. The blow was crushing, causing her to fall to her knees, clutching at the wound that bled in a scarlet spot on her chest. With the last of her strength, she raised her gaze to So Kung-yu, only managing to squeeze his name out of her dry throat. He stood, detached and unwavering, admitting that he did not want to take the life of a member of his comrade's family, even if it was a condemned woman in front of him. His eyes reflected a deep abyss of decisions, and Tom Key caught a faint thread of hope. With a bloody grin, like a mask of despair, she asked, "Could you spare me?" "You're a hero. You made a promise to Laos," she whispered, bleeding on the floor, but So Kang-yu snapped, "I'm not a hero right now." Her plea echoed in his mind, "And yet, please spare me." She clung to life like a drowning man to a straw. "I don't want to die. I don't want to." And with a tearful voice she continued, "But you." She imagined the faces of those whom she had once condemned to suffering, whose pleas for mercy she had ignored. There was no pity in his eyes, only a cold question. "And how did you treat those who begged you for mercy?" Her face twisted into a snarl of mad laughter and tears as the realization of her own crimes crashed down on her. Teo Kang-yu clenched his fist, a bloody aura dancing around it, and muttered a curse as he made his final decision. Meanwhile, the echo of their furious battle shook the walls of the prison, spreading throughout all the corridors. In the distance, other prisoners looked at each other with alarm, asking, "Did you hear that?" Someone like Mina, with a mad glint in her eyes, exclaimed, "It must be Seo Kang Yu! Oh, what should I do?" While another, clearly under the spell, whispered about awakening feelings of love. Chaos reigned among the guards. A young girl, trembling with terror, muttered, "What's going on? After all, in some people this only awakened a feeling of fear, and in someone, like the bandaged figure who heard the name Seo Kangyu, a terrible feeling of anticipation was born. Far from the battlefield, a woman in a black cloak, with a determined expression on her face, said, "This won't do." Her gaze was directed into the invisible distance. Exactly, because his eyes, full of wild energy, burned with one desire, to immediately rise to the top. And so, with a speed unnatural for a human, he rushed forward, cutting through space. The explosive impact shook the air, leaving behind only a crimson glow. A cap dropped by someone slowly fell down, like a forgotten symbol. But instead of further attacking, the warrior froze, looking at the object in surprise. And above him, like a ghost from the past, towered another prisoner. It was Kingston, who offered with a sly smile, "Grandpa can play with you." "Creepy old man?" flashed through the bandaged man's head, but his lips had already spread into a grin. This is how prisoner numbered 001, the king of the 5th underground level, met. Meanwhile, in the control room, the guards were shouting the general's name in panic. She kept her cool and asked about what was happening while her subordinate breathlessly reported. "Kingston and Huang Xiong-Huan collided? Excellent," she said, to the soldier's complete bewilderment. "One of them will die today," she added with a predatory grin, anticipating the outcome. She would have preferred to see Kingston win, as Huang Xiong-Huan was a much bigger threat. And then her gaze, sharp as a blade, abruptly changed direction. "By the way, why does he always drag that girl around with him?" she said, hinting at Huang's companion. Meanwhile, Kingston, with genuine delight, repeated the offer. "Play with you? Of course." But this time, Huang, as if sensing a trap, said in a strangled voice, "I don't feel like it." "Yes, but Grandpa really wants it," the old man insisted, his words laced with a hidden threat. It was he, Kingston, who was sentenced to the longest term, although, unlike the bloodthirsty monsters of the 4th and 5th levels, he only had 3 lives on his conscience. The first victim of this fatal force was Caracas, at that time the most powerful of the villains. Then Clark and Hilo fell, the peerless duo of heroes who were thought to be invincible. After his sudden appearance, he took the lives of the 3 whom the whole world recognized as the strongest. And if even the invincible fell at his hands, then who will now dare to say that he himself is not one? "It's a pity," he simply sighed, and, as if tired of the burden of his own greatness, he voluntarily surrendered to the state. He was dangerous, no doubt, but his comparatively small number of victims, and most importantly, his voluntary surrender, allowed him to avoid execution for as long as 30 years, since the relations between the heroes and the government were very strained at that time. "I won't kill you," the old man said slyly. "I'll just play with you, because I don't have the habit of trampling young shoots." "As you wish," the young girl answered with a touch of fatalism, as if sensing the inevitable. And the next moment, the blue opened up, shaking the space and throwing the mercenaries away. The game began, and now the familiar darkness envelops them, swirling them in a whirlwind of bloody explosions. But there is no fear on the girl's face, only cold determination. She is ready to accept the challenge. The next moment, the air burst open, and the space around was distorted by the onslaught of an unknown force. A hurricane of energy throws them, like dolls, into the abyss, where time loses its meaning and gravity loses its power. But in the midst of this chaos, there is one who is not broken, who is ready to stand to the end. His gaze is steel, and his will is unwavering, even when the world around him is falling apart. And so, in the very heart of the storm, chaos itself takes shape, bursting forth from the depths of its being in a blood-red glow. And this force, pulsating with pain and rage, gathers in his clenched fist, ready for destruction. Then this rage bursts out, tearing the fabric of reality. At this moment, every atom of space screams in pain, unable to resist destruction. And every blow he strikes shakes the world like a bolt of lightning. Crimson flashes illuminate the space as a scarlet wave spreads beneath our feet. Anyone who dares to stand in the way crumbles to dust, becoming just an echo of this carnage. But in the center of this chaos, her gaze remains hard as steel, reflecting the bloody light. And the old man, intoxicated by his own power, only grins sarcastically, looking at her. With a caustic sneer, he questions the very nature of her abilities, suggesting that she continue the dance of death. By mocking the weakness of the fallen, he provokes her, challenging her silence. To him, she is just another self-confident frog in a well, who is unaware of true power. But every word he says only ignites the fire inside her, causing the ground beneath her feet to shake. In the next moment, reality itself around her splits, responding to an internal impulse. Even an old man, accustomed to absolute control, feels the ground slipping from under his feet. In the distance, amidst the dust and chaos, some whisper in panic about the coming end, while others remain coldly calm. The general, with unshakable confidence, asserts that even such power is not capable of destroying the walls of this prison. But the old man, without saying any unnecessary words, is already preparing his next step. He moves swiftly, like a shadow, ready to put his young opponent's brains back in place. This sudden jerk takes them by surprise, knocking them out of the rhythm of the fight. Her eyes, wide with surprise, reflect the approaching danger, and then a powerful blow throws her to the side, upsetting her balance. The spectators freeze, their hearts beating in unison with the roar of the battle. And only one question hovers in the air, like an echo, trying to make sense of what happened. But amidst this chaos, a sudden, disturbing realization emerges. The gaze falls on a gaping wound in the very depths of the earth. The wall, completely, the speaker states with horror, looking at the screen. Despair and hopelessness are reflected in the woman's wide eyes. "How deep has this destroyer gone?" asks a voice full of concern. But another figure, with a cold grin, finds something exciting in this. "Is it worth following him, plunging into this abyss?" sounds the anticipation. However, suddenly, the space around them is painted in an alarming purple light, and new faces appear. A sinister, confident smile blossoms on the face of one of them, sitting among her companions. "I think my conversation will be much more interesting," she challenges, changing all the rules of the game. "Who are you?" is the direct but confused question addressed to the stranger. "You'll get to know me as we go," she replies, a devilish glint dancing in her eyes. There's panic at the command post. What is she doing on the 5th underground floor? The mysterious figure, crouching, extends his hand forward as if giving a sign. "First of all, dear observers," her gaze pierces them right through. "You're out of the game," she says with an icy, final intonation. The operator catches his breath, his fists clench in helplessness, and in the depths, before the gigantic gates, stands the lone figure of the general. "The 1st underground floor is cleared," he reports calmly. "Open the way to the 2nd. General Seo Kang-yu." "Wait!" Desperate cries are heard, but the decision seems to have already been made, and the seconds, like grains of sand, slip through the fingers. There is a resounding emptiness beneath our feet, and above our heads there is only darkness and the menacing shadows of steel structures. His thoughts turn to the outside world, but the depths of the dungeon seem to absorb the connection. A column of pure energy erupts from his body, cutting through concrete and rock. The connection with the surface barely flickers, barely audible as a whisper reaching his mind. The general steps onto the 2nd level, where the air feels alien after the bloody carnage on the floor above. Unlike the first, permeated with the smell of iron and death, this floor maintains a different, ominous silence. There is no foul smell here, no traces of recent events, only sterile, frightening cleanliness. No people, no corpses, just silent corridors like a lost ghost in a giant crypt. The purity and silence of this place evoke not calm, but a premonition of something eerie. A sudden, piercing scream breaks the silence, causing him to flinch. A figure emerges from the shadows, surrounded by demonic dogs, desperately ordering them not to come closer. Flames burst from the mouth of one of the monsters, and its eyes burn with hatred, ready to devour any enemy. Fear and rage distort the woman's features, her pleas merging with the roars of monsters. He turns around, his gaze catching the approaching threat, and a vague recognition is born in his heart. Seo Kang-yu recognizes the attacker as Seo Kang-ho, and the shock momentarily paralyzes them both. A mad scream escapes her lips as bloody threads, like tentacles, wrap around his body. Bloody energy flares around the general, and Kang-ho, defeated, looks at him in shock. He hurries to her, his words stuck in his throat, seeing her confusion and pain. In her brother's arms, Kang-ho tries to comprehend what happened, her mind torn between shock and admiration. Questions pour out of her in a stream, about his abilities, about his true position, about his hidden power. Catching sight of another figure in uniform, Kang-ho tries to comprehend what she sees. Could this really be her brother's colleague? The one whose eyes glow red warns of danger, but Kang-ho only shrugs awkwardly. His voice is distant, addressing Kang-ho as master with an unusual respect. The confusion on Kang-ho's face gives way to a mischievous smile. After all, it seems they are only just getting to know each other now. And so she, with bold confidence, extends her hand, declaring herself his daughter-in-law. Frozen with surprise, he is struck not only by her words, but also by their amazing similarity. Suddenly, through the growing tension, the mention of a second underground floor is heard, and the name male echoes with alarm. Kang Ho, instantly changing his tone, senses the approaching threat, foreshadowing the arrival of uninvited guests. A grim determination crosses his face as he quietly agrees, realizing the inevitability of what is to come. In the shadows of the underground prison, Kang Ho thoughtfully assesses the sins of those held here. Heavy words of revenge are heard in response, and the name male is now pronounced with particular bitterness. Kang Ho seems shocked to learn of the strange acquisition or connection shrouded in that name. Returning to the meeting, Kang Ho admits that she knew him only from echoes of the digital world. With a wide smile, she introduces herself as Hong Ji-ah, the guard of his mysterious prison, recognizing his beauty in person. She starts talking about her brother, mentioning his girlfriend, but before she can finish, she is interrupted by a sudden thought. Kang Ho's fingers point to her stomach, foreshadowing a stunning revelation. And here it is, a confession that shakes her to the depths of her soul. His nephew is growing up inside her. The man's eyes reflect profound shock, as Kang Ho calmly explains how little time has passed. She continues by linking this to the Huang Song-Huan case, explaining that it was a recent discovery for them too. Too early, too sudden. This confession was supposed to come later, but now it hangs in the air, demanding confirmation. To this statement, he simply throws out a short, expressionless nothing, as if brushing off her assumptions. She, still shocked, demands an explanation, questioning his appearance and even his form. And then he reveals his true, dark role, not just a guard, but an executioner. Her voice breaks with shock as she tries to comprehend this monstrous connection. There is a desperate attempt to find logic in her words, a suspicion that he was forced to accept this terrible burden. He sees her confusion and decides to shed light on what is happening, promising a brief but important explanation. A fresh look of shock crosses her face when he mentions the EMP attack, revealing the scale of the disaster. She tries to figure out who is behind this, but he dryly states that the investigation is not yet complete. Suddenly, desperation creeps into her voice as she remembers Kang Ho, searching for him amidst the chaos. The answer does not come immediately, with uncertainty, but it points to the very heart of the danger, the fifth underground floor. His gaze, full of anxiety, plunges into an unknown depth, and a silent exhalation freezes on his lips, foreboding trouble. Her heart sank with anticipation, and her hand involuntarily pressed to her chest, betraying her inner turmoil. His eyelids droop as if he were weighing the gravity of the situation before making a final decision. And then he says the words that put everything into place. From the lowest level, Kang Ho sends a signal for help. A sigh of relief escapes her, but his silence, full of hidden meaning, does not allow her to relax completely. He offers her shelter, but she firmly refuses, realizing that she cannot leave him alone. She insists, declaring that only with her help will he be able to penetrate deeper safely. And then, without hesitation, she reveals her unique power, psychometry, which allows her to see other people's memories. She hurries to reassure him, assuring him that she did not violate his personal space because her gift is not used unnecessarily. She explains the ethical framework of her gift assistance in psychiatry and investigation, and then reveals the plan. On the second floor, Meal and Male, who wield the power of summoning, have captured dangerous prisoners. These prisoners, by subjugating the will of their opponents, spread their influence. With this sinister power they strike, penetrating into the very consciousness. And they turn everyone into a spineless puppet, depriving them of freedom and control. And now, in an ominous silence, all the prisoners on the second floor are under their total control, becoming part of their dark plan. But she breaks the silence by claiming to have valuable information about this terrifying phenomenon, explaining that Meal and Meal were the successors of a certain Marco, perhaps indicating the source of their power. And therefore, possessing such information, she insists on an immediate rise, because time does not wait. Then, with a serious expression, she adds that among these puppets, there are also those who were supposed to protect their own security guards. He listens to her, and only the silent expression on his face reflects the weight of what he heard. She continues, emphasizing that this force does not discriminate, subjugating absolutely everyone. But she immediately adds that her own ability allows her to distinguish true enemies from those who have only succumbed to influence. The man still seems hesitant, asking if this means they are already dead. For if so, what is the point of saving them if their minds no longer belong to them? But she firmly declares, no, they are still alive, their souls have not gone out, and as soon as the effect of the cursed ability is disrupted, everyone will return to their previous state. However, the man remains pessimistic, doubting their strength and possibility of success. But her determination is unwavering, and she points to herself as ready to take on this burden. She's convinced that she is the one who can break through the veil of control and convince them to return. But in front of her, like a wall, stood others, those who had succumbed to someone else's will. They immediately explained to her that this was the work of one of the elders, his terrifying power, and around him, shrouded in a red haze, were his subordinates, completely under his spell. The question arose how to distinguish loyal guards from puppets in this sinister game. He concentrated, trying to find at least one glimmer of truth in this murky veil, and suddenly her eyes flashed with purple light, seeing through the hidden. In the back of her mind, she caught a faint but clear signal pointing to the source, and she confidently pointed to the two who were standing in the very depths of this chaos. It was they, the most distant ones, who kept something special, something that concealed a threat. They had to be neutralized first, and the rest would be dealt with later. But then the scarlet fetters tightened around her, causing a cry of surprise and pain. She found herself trapped in a crimson cocoon, unable to see what was happening. Kan Yu, alarmed, asked what kind of dark forces had entangled his companion. The sphere pulsed, distorting sounds and images, hiding everything inside. And he, with a gloomy understanding, uttered only one word: distribution, the key to the riddle. He began to understand the mechanism of this sinister system that divided everyone into two categories. Those who still clung to life became mere weak-willed guards, and those who had already fallen took on a completely different, terrifying form, ready to rush into battle. Their eyes burned with madness, reflecting an alien evil will aimed at destruction. He realized that the dead had become nothing but soulless criminals, used for the darkest deeds. As the protagonist stood, surrounded by a crimson whirlwind of distorted bodies, his calm only emphasized the horror of what was happening. The sisters, frozen by the crimson glow, looked at this spectacle with undisguised alarm, their faces reflecting confusion and fear. One of them, as if unable to contain her growing excitement, turned to her companion with a silent question. Her anxiety was deepened by the question that troubled them both. Was this stranger's power greater than that of their own teacher? But then thoughts turned to another figure, as mysterious as it was powerful, the girl standing at a distance. A deep silence hung in the air, broken only by barely audible whispers, full of hidden pain and despair. The younger one clung to her sister, and in her eyes, full of unchildish horror, one could read only one phrase: "I'm scared." In response to this silent cry, a voice was heard trying to calm down, but its source remained beyond understanding. Suddenly, a desperate cry, full of pain and rage, burst out of the red whirlwind, tearing apart the silence. From the depths of the crimson captivity came an indignant voice, full of misunderstanding and anger, accusing them of imprisonment. The hero, completely unperturbed, explained that he had simply temporarily eliminated all the guards. And then, with chilling calm, he added that he had also gotten rid of all the imprisoned criminals. Shock filled the air when his interlocutor reminded him of the impossibility of such an execution without special equipment located deep underground. But he only retorted coldly, confirming his personal involvement in each death, and asked if she had any objections. With chilling confidence, he declared that it was his own decision, his personal will. There was a note of disbelief in her voice when she asked for the general's consent, but the answer was short and categorical: yes. A desperate groan escaped her chest as the full realization of the scale of what had happened washed over her. Her mind could not accept the enormity of this act, trying to comprehend why the general allowed such a thing. He, without a shadow of a doubt, continued to assert that he was simply doing his duty as a warden, and, with an innocent look, asked what was wrong. But anger overcame fear, and she exploded with a scream that reminded him of the true purpose of the guards: not to kill, but to correct. He, in response to her cry, only abruptly cut off the flow of words, tired of empty admonitions about mercy. Her exhortations about heroes and law fell on deaf ears, only driving him deeper into his grim resolve. A creepy smile played on his lips. He knew too well what it was like to blindly strive for an abstract more. An image of his own death flashed through his mind if he ever allowed these animals to live. He truly didn't care what name they called him, a hero or a monster. He simply did what he had to do, what was destined to destroy those who had rejected their humanity. The frightened Kangyu, as if trapped in a dark aura, quietly whispered that these creatures were also once humans. His gaze darted to her, and a chilling, "What do you mean?" hung in the air. "People too?" His voice sounded like a hoarse, mocking laugh. The faces of countless victims came to his mind, and he said that these criminals deserved only one thing. He recalled how, in the past, due to imprecise jurisdiction, innocent people suffered and debates about the death penalty tormented society. But once psychometry was able to reveal true guilt, the injustice disappeared without a trace. He looked at Kang Yu, whose eyes were full of horror, as if asking, "You know this yourself, right?" She, clinging to the last threads of mercy, whispered that everyone has their own story. "History?" he asked, his tone laced with mockery, especially when he mentioned meal and male. He said, addressing her by name. "There are no people in this world without a story." But his main question remained. Didn't their victims have their own lives, their own stories? The fate of these creatures was predetermined, that was clear. And it doesn't matter whether they die at his hands or by the decision of an ordinary court, the end will be the same. "Enough," he said harshly, as a single tear rolled down Kang Yu's cheek. "I'll send you upstairs and proceed as planned." And, with this decision, the space around him exploded with blood-red energy, foreshadowing a storm. Shadows clad in heavy armor, faceless and menacing embodiments of his enemies, appeared before Kang Yu. His gaze, piercing the darkness, sought answers, and an inner voice, like an echo, indicated overseers, 3 behind the backs of the others. In an instant, he realized that his path was irreversible. His ally must be protected at any cost. And, somewhere nearby, in the whirlpool of the approaching storm, someone's tear rolled down a cheek, full of inescapable melancholy. Kang Ho will be devastated, he thought silently, knowing the price of his choice was heavy. But there was no turning back. Only the bottomless red abyss of his determination swallowed up all doubts. The next moment, he himself became part of this abyss, falling like a whirlwind on his armored opponents. A mighty blow, imbued with dark power, tore through the air, heading straight for the heart of the approaching threat. The armor cracked, unable to withstand the onslaught, revealing the vulnerability of even the most fearsome creatures. His face twisted in pain and rage, every blow an echo of his inner struggle. "Kang Ho will be upset," flashed through his mind again, like a bitter premonition. The pupil narrowed, the world around narrowed to a single target, painted in crimson light. The sudden onslaught knocked him off his feet, and his own name, Seo Kang Yu, sounded like a death sentence. The darkness thickened, and from it emerged a terrifying image, a gigantic figure woven from bloody gloom. His fist clenched as words about ideology and the path he had chosen came to mind. And along with them came a wave of longing for the unfulfilled and a burning hatred for those who destroyed his world. Someone's words, full of despair and pain, seemed to penetrate this chaos. All the hatred and despair of the world seemed to condense in this bloody shroud, ready to engulf all living things. And in the midst of this darkness he suddenly smiled, bitterly and detachedly, remembering the last, most important words. His power, once contained, burst forth, weaving a crimson crown of thorns around him. Words of despair and horror froze on the lips of those who witnessed this transformation. Every thread of that bloody energy was sharp, deadly, ready to tear apart flesh and spirit. Demonic silhouettes, nightmares come to life, emerged from the darkness, obeying his will. And he pointed with his hand, uttering only one fateful word, "Fifth." A stream of blood enveloped him, creating a living, pulsating barrier between him and his enemies. The whirlwind of the abyss grew, threatening to engulf not only bodies, but hope itself. This force, fed by pain and suffering, knew only one thing, destruction, remembering the ancient victims. But deep in his bloodied mind, something human still smoldered and was slowly fading away. However, far away in another dimension, another purple power has awakened, foreshadowing a new evil. Those who were waiting for her greeted the moment of awakening with mad jubilation, smiling ominously. And he, a lonely figure in the center of the bloody sphere, stood, surrounded by his own prison. The sphere grew, drawing into its crimson grip those who were doomed to become part of it. This time, the target was others, and the girl in uniform, trapped, looked at him in horror. His true opponents turned out to be 3 watchers, whose shadows thickened in anticipation of battle. And then, at that decisive moment, he made his decision, knowing there was no turning back. His eyes, blazing with red fire, reflected the flames of inevitable retribution. And above all this, a voice rang out, full of a strange, almost joyful greeting. "Nice to meet you." 2 figures, one of them with a shining halo, appeared before him, accompanied by a monstrous creation. Their smiles disappeared, giving way to cold calculation as they said, "Since you came yourself, there'll be less work for me," he finished, his gaze devoid of any mercy. The air thickened, foreshadowing imminent reprisal, while crimson threads of power swirled around him. He recognized them by calling them by name, "Meal, meal, meal," but there was not a shadow of warmth in his voice. One of the captives, confused, asked, "Why didn't you come to us?" And the second, with surprise and pain, added, "You were supposed to die." "Remove your spell," he suggested coldly, "and you can die painlessly." But the girls, although frightened, boldly asked, Is there no choice without a fatal outcome? He explained the rules of this dungeon, where leniency ended on the first 2 floors. But the beasts from the second underground floor, who killed dozens of people, deserve nothing but death. His voice sounded like a sentence. At this moment, one of the captives turned to him. Stranger, you are our teacher's colleague, aren't you? And that girl who caught us? She added, pointing to another figure. Your aura is very different from your colleagues, the girl noted with apprehension. In response, there was an oppressive silence, broken only by measured breathing. You're definitely going to hell, one of them shouted, but the other immediately stopped her. Male, be quiet. Now we'll find out who's going there, he said calmly, preparing for the fight. If you promise to let us out, we will break the spell, they offered in a desperate attempt to avoid the worst. Rage flared in his red eyes as he said their names again. Meal, male. The red threads were already wrapped around them, and he warned, you are only making things worse. Will you put on the monitoring device? One of the girls answered defiantly. Overseer, we haven't committed a crime worthy of death. You understand that, right? That's why we refuse to, she finished decisively, while the man, with a stern look, snapped, you shouldn't talk to animals. Kanyu gasped in horror, her name leaving her lips like a last breath of hope. But for him, everything was perfectly clear. There was a way out, and this way out was only an increase in the pain that he was ready to inflict. The girl tried to get through to their minds, assuring them that they didn't want to fight and were ready to come to an agreement, but in response, she only received an icy, I refuse. Words no longer mattered as the red vortex of energy began to contract around them, and the cry of, Lord Kangyu, broke the silence. Let's resolve this peacefully, she pleaded, but received only a cold, sobering, sit quietly in response. Bloody threads wrapped around them like snakes, depriving them of any opportunity to resist or even move. A shrill scream escaped from the chest as the magical bond squeezed the bodies, causing unbearable pain. And while the captives writhed in agony, he coldly recalled the words of one villain. I never thought that this method of torture would ever be useful to me. If you won't talk, one of them shouted, then you yourself are the beast. A beast? The other whispered, her eyes wide with realization. No, he's a monster. The monster watched its prey, entangled in the tentacles of the sinister crimson, with cold blood. Their special skills, their life force, were drained away, leaving only a tormented shell. Meanwhile, true power began to blossom behind him, painting the deserted chamber in eerie patterns of crimson horror. You are both just shadows, unworthy of bearing the name of man. His icy voice rang out, full of undisguised contempt. And yet you dare call me a monster? He asks, as the surrounding reality tears and distorts, revealing his true, terrifying form. It's corrupting, he breathes, and that single word is a condemnation of everything he despises as his monstrous form finally emerges from the shadows. And around, among the sharp fragments of a dying world, a lonely silhouette in uniform freezes, surrounded by pulsating darkness and bloody reflections. The scarlet eyes reflect the ruthlessness of the awakened power, and a grimace of despair and rage is frozen on the distorted face, ready to unleash all his despair and rage on the world. But even in this hell of torment, there is no room for an outstretched hand, only a heart-rending, despairing refusal. And so she once again gathers her will into a fist, calling on the last strength that is capable of holding the barrier. I, she whispers, and there is incredible determination in that single word. The glowing ball of energy in her palms vibrates, thinning, but the girl is unwavering. I can handle it. Meanwhile, somewhere below, amidst the crimson flashes, a figure appears whose presence in itself is alarming. An ominous circle on the ground pulsates, erupting from its depths, distorted shadows that take shape. Each creature of chaos is an embodiment of nightmare, with burning eyes and crowns of pain, bursting out. Their colossal leader towers over the lone figure, a figure of destruction itself. The monstrous mouth opens in a silent scream, but the observer only calmly notes, so this is what it is like, this call. And the next second, the general, without losing his composure, makes it clear, since these creatures are not people, their fate is predetermined. His movements are dances of death, each swing of the blade piercing flesh and air, leaving bloody streaks. He dives into the thick of the monsters, becoming a whirlwind of destruction that crushes enemies without mercy. There is only chaos around him, monsters writhing in agony, their faces distorted with horror and pain. Sharp red flashes tear through the darkness, and each blow finds its victim, leaving no chance for resistance. Rising above the battlefield, the general unleashes a flurry of blows on his enemies, weaving a web of scarlet blades. One of the monsters is dealt a fatal blow, its flesh cracking under the sheer force. They fall one after another, lifeless, cut to pieces, while the bloody dance continues. Under the hail of attacks, the monsters don't even have a chance to breathe, and the commander's face is frozen in merciless calm. Above, the girl continues to hold on, clutching the glowing artifact with her last strength, her face distorted with agony. An angel's voice cuts through the deafening cacophony, asking about her endurance, and the answer comes through the pain. 10 more minutes. 10 minutes that seem like an eternity, but her will is not broken, and gritting her teeth, she repeats to herself, just a little more. The heroines struggle to stay on their feet, surrounded by light that slowly consumes them. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light pierces space, shaking reality itself. A cough escapes from her chest, and in her eyes there is only one question, mixed with horror. What is this unimaginable force? But at that moment, a familiar figure in uniform appears in the field of view, whose presence seems unexpected. The girls look at him with a mixture of despair and hope, an unspoken question in their eyes. Thoughts seep into their minds like poison. Why chase each one separately when you can take them all at once? He towers over them, his words ringing out like a death sentence. This is your last chance. And his gaze, cold and unyielding, leaves no doubt about the seriousness of his intentions. Red threads of energy, like veins, burst from his hands, weaving the space around him. The girls are horrified to realize that they are surrounded, and the multiple layers of magical barriers seem insurmountable. And his voice, full of authority, gives an order that brooks no objection. Red reflections dance in his eyes as he speaks the last word, increasing the pressure of the spell. A shrill cry of pain echoes through the space as her body succumbs to the unbearable force. From above, a complex magic circle on the floor, made up of glowing runes, can be seen beginning to activate. He looks up and sees before him the majestic images of the 4 archangels, enveloped in divine radiance. Standing in the midst of this chaos, he clenches his fists, preparing for the final confrontation. The names ring in the air like ancient prophecies, beginning with Michael, then Gabriel. Raphael, and finally Uriel, are powerful guardians of the light. 4 gigantic figures appear in all their menacing beauty, and red threads connect them to this world. Shock distorts the girls' faces as realization hits them. A desperate cry escapes his lips, and sparks flare up around his hands, like a final barrier. Even strong men cannot help but let out a shocked sigh as they watch the unfolding drama. The words catch in their throats, paralyzing the guards as power instantly fills the air. Don't come any closer. A piercing cry breaks the silence, calling for a retreat from the border. Her threat hangs in the air, like a promise of inevitable retribution for the fate of the innocent. But suddenly pain pierces her, taking away her strength, and a scream gets stuck somewhere in her chest. The eyes are wide open, but the gaze is no longer focused. Horror and despair drown out everything. Appa, a whisper of helplessness when scarlet threads, as if alive, wrap around her sister. Your sister's death will not be painless, the cruel sentence sounds, becoming reality. A painful groan escapes from the chest as the magical threads dig into the body, causing unbearable agony. It hurts, it. Her own cry echoes, as if her soul feels every wound. The suffering spreads, causing other officers to also writhe in unknown pain. But one of them only smirks, anticipating victory, his gaze full of dark determination. I'll take it off! A desperate cry breaks against the stone walls, offering a truce at the cost of one's own will. Let me talk, she begs, but a cruel order interrupts her. First, let everyone go. The commander's eyes glow an ominous red as he holds her captive in a state of powerlessness. The girl recoils, her last hope crumbling under the weight of the merciless conditions. Holding hands, the sisters bow as if accepting their fate, while an ancient glow flares around them. Cries of surprise ring out around the guards as a new, unknown force begins to awaken. The confusion on the guards' faces instantly turns to shock. One of them involuntarily shouts out an obscene curse, trying to comprehend what is happening. A scarlet plume of energy erupts from the darkness, piercing space with deadly speed. The sisters watch in horror as their savior, revealed to be a hero, acts with ruthless determination. The corpses are blown to pieces, and only bloody remnants of what were once guards remain on the floor. One of the remaining guards, stunned, turns to the hero Seo Kang Yu, whose eyes are burning with red flames, coldly orders them to go upstairs. The guard, realizing the futility of resistance, timidly asks for something but stops short. The hero agrees to their request, promising to let him talk to Hong Ji-ah. The sisters listen to his words with a glimmer of hope, but Kang Yu sets a condition. He has no intention of negotiating in the midst of this bloody massacre. Meanwhile, the other guard, freed from his spell, writhes in agony, clutching his head. Waking up, he looks around in confusion until Kang Yu tells him that it's all over. The spell on the jailers has been lifted, and they are now free from outside influence. He asks about the sisters, and Kang Yu coldly points at them. The hero conveys their last wish, to talk to him before the inevitable execution. The Guardian calls out to Kang Yu, offering an alternative to place control seals on them. But Kang Yu is adamant, reminding him of past mistakes and the victims of the underground floors. All those responsible for the deaths of innocents will be destroyed by his own hands. The sisters, clutching at their last straw, turn to the jailer Hong Jia. A cold sentence hangs in the air, reflecting the jailer's grim determination. Despair grips the sisters as their world collapses before their eyes. But even in her gaze there flickers a shadow of doubt, a moment of indecision. She stood there, powerless to change anything, a prisoner of her own duty. The last chance, the last breath before the inevitable, and the sisters beg for mercy. But the jailer only sighs coldly, preparing to finish what she started. Her hand rises, entwined with a bloody glow, heralding the fulfillment of the oath. And so, with a stony face, she proclaims the beginning of the last rite. A cry of despair breaks the silence, a plea for salvation that it seemed no one would hear. The sisters, breaking their voices, cry out to their brother, hoping for a miracle. But the jailer is adamant, her gaze is burning with determination, and her strength is preparing to strike. Her movements are sharp, imbued with an ominous energy that foreshadows a fatal outcome. And at that moment, a strange, sly smile appears on her lips. Suddenly, space distorts, and a figure appears, holding the world in its hands. It's Marco, and his words about equality sound like an ominous sentence. The sisters, in confusion, recognize in him their teacher, their mentor, who has now become an executioner. Even the jailer seems stunned by the appearance of this powerful man. Marco just smirks, enjoying his power over the captives. His face distorts into an evil grimace, foreshadowing a new threat, and the jailer, whose determination just a moment ago was unshakable, freezes in horror and incomprehension. Questions hang in the air. Is this a common force? An illusion woven from fear? But the old man, who looks at them through an unknown barrier, knows that such abilities are beyond the capabilities of ordinary criminals. And the officer instantly recognizes the signature of an old enemy, understanding whose true power it is. But the main question remains, why is this old man, this Marco, protecting them? The answers don't matter. The officer unleashes his dark power, confident that the outcome is predetermined. The girls look at the approaching darkness with horror frozen in their eyes. Suddenly, Marco activates his true power, surrounding himself and the girls in a glowing golden field. The officer is confused as an impenetrable circle of ancient magic appears before him. His confidence is replaced by shock and bewilderment. What kind of trick did this old man pull off? Marco looks back at him, his eyes burning with determination as the golden runes around him multiply, and his dark energy, aimed at the victims, suddenly shatters into thousands of pieces. Marco's face twists into a grin, and he says a name full of deep meaning. The officer falls, his body pierced by pain, and his consciousness drowns in the chaos of golden shards. The girls, rescued but still frightened, feel only growing anxiety. And in the officer's eyes, a pure, burning rage and deep disgust ignite. A sudden leap, and the world turns upside down. They all find themselves in the middle of a sun-drenched field. Old man Marco, with a gentle smile, pats the head of the boy sitting next to him. One of them, a formidable warrior, bursts into laughter, amazed at the old man's inexhaustible energy. Others seem to be immersed in a light squabble, barely noticing the unreality surrounding them. And even in the midst of this idyll, sparks of old grievances flare up, foreshadowing new, albeit mundane, battles. Suddenly, a call sounds, tearing them out of their everyday life, like a call to something important. And, as if in response to the call, the old sage suggests leaving all worries behind and simply giving in to the fun. Around them is the embodiment of pure, unclouded joy, sincere smiles and greetings from young souls. Laughter and warmth embrace everyone except one, whose shadow of alienation does not dissolve even in this light. His silent loneliness raises a question that pierces the silence. Is he really a stranger to this children's world? He admits his incompetence, his awkwardness in communicating with those who have not yet experienced the bitterness of life. The old man, trying to break through his armor, calls on him to remember the tenderness of parental affection, carefree days. But these words only open an old wound. His childhood was cut tragically short, leaving only emptiness. The only consolation, the only support left was his older brother, who guarded his shadow. Realization pierces the old sage, his face distorted by a grimace of guilt and deep sympathy. For a moment, their gazes meet, connecting them with a thread of unspoken understanding, heavy and sincere. And then, trying to atone for his awkwardness, The old man invites him to be himself with him like a child. Surprise, bordering on shock, is reflected in the eyes of the hero, who is used to hiding his true feelings. But this turns out to be just a game, instantly relieving the tension, although the aftertaste from what was heard remains. The old man smiles, noting his reaction, but in that smile there is also a shadow of a true desire to help. After all, words, even if couched in humor, carry a deep meaning that cannot simply be dismissed. However, despite the kindness of the moment, the hero isolates himself, choosing his path of alienation amidst the general joy. And then, suddenly, the world crumbles into hellish inferno, a rain of fire, cries of pain, the outstretched bloody hand of a child. He stands in the midst of this chaos, his gaze the quintessence of pain and boundless determination. The faces of his friends, distorted with pain, appear before him, and bloody tears flow from his eyes, while someone's voice whispers the last, "Everything is fine." And the moment of shattered reality, where fragmented memories swirl around, and the pain of innocent faces pierces him, leaving only bitterness. Before him is the ghost of the one who seemed to hold the fate of the world in his hands. A man whose eyes have seen too much, whose wisdom has become a curse. But on the hero's face there is not a shadow of hesitation, only determination burning with a scarlet fire. Suddenly, the world around seems to split apart, and a familiar image disappears. He wonders what happened, why his companion looks so confused. Her ability, which seemed ordinary, now becomes the key to hidden knowledge. He demands answers, wanting to understand the origins of the tragedy that surrounds them. At this moment, the ghost of the hero Marco reveals a new facet, a vision of the past hidden in his power. She understands that before them are not just memories, but living imprints of someone else's life. One sees them as nothing but a problem, the other as a tiny, redeeming tenderness. The confusion grows. Why are these specific images so important? The truth is cruel. Their fate was tied to this force against their will. He's adamant, no memories will change the harsh sentence passed by fate. Her voice is barely audible, saturated with despair from the realization of hopelessness. With a heavy heart, she lets go of these ghostly images, granting them one last moment of freedom. But reality awaits beyond illusion, where the bars silently keep their secrets. The sound of the hammer marks the beginning of a new era, an era of ruthless bargaining over human destinies. And somewhere behind these walls, in humiliated bodies, a spark of resistance still glows. Deprived of sight, deprived of freedom, he is only a shadow in a cage whose soul cries out in despair. Hell, it's not a place, it's a state into which everyone here has been plunged. Meal and Male are innocent souls who hold each other tightly in this darkness. Only 6 years old, but the pain of a cruel world is already imprinted on their eyes. Here, under the rubble of the old world, the chosen ones collect living talents. Betrayed by their own father, Meal and Male became lots in this monstrous auction. But not all talents were equally valued in this distorted society. Werewolves, whose abilities were visible to the naked eye, were especially in demand. But children with the gift of summoning, whose power was hidden from the superficial eye, were considered less valuable. No one dared to buy them because their gift was a mystery, and the children froze in agonizing anticipation. But then came an announcement that broke the silence. Their buyer had been found. One of the clients seemed to know about their unique and dangerous gift. The old businessman's wary grin only increased the feeling of anxiety. But the true horror was hidden in the words of this woman, whose eyes burned with a mad fire. The children's innocent faces were distorted by the realization of the monstrous fate that awaited them. Her words were a promise of a slow, painful transformation. A sinister smile lit up her face, foreshadowing the experiments to come. And the world around her seemed to freeze in anticipation of her crazy plans. Suddenly, the room shook and the floor opened up in a blinding explosion of energy. Panic gripped everyone as an unknown force tore apart the peace of the auction room. Amid the chaos, the young sisters clung to each other, trying to make sense of what was happening. An incredible spectacle unfolded before their eyes. People, enclosed in glowing cocoons, soared into the sky. And above all this, an ominous, triumphant laughter rang out. A mighty figure appeared out of nowhere, exuding power and serenity. High in the sky, above the disappearing city, two people were hovering, a mysterious man and his companion. With a satisfied grin, the man uttered the word that could explain this entire unimaginable spectacle: magic. His assistant, Lippus, looked stunned, amazed by the scale of his demonstration. There was a caustic dialogue in the air about the lesson, about the power of the call and the importance of fantasy, which was completely incomprehensible to the witnesses. Meanwhile, the world around them had turned into a scorched wasteland where their strange conversation unfolded. The man, as if nothing had happened, offered to continue his lesson, while Lippis was horrified by his ability to bring down meteors. And, suddenly, from the chaos of the ruins, a timid voice was heard, interrupting their discussion. These were the same sisters who looked with hope at the powerful magician, asking for help. They claimed to have the same summoning power as him, their eyes glowing with hope. Lippis, jealously guarding her status as the only student, hastened to object, but Marco's words quickly put her in her place. The intriguing magician invited the girls to demonstrate their abilities, which provoked the furious indignation of his companion. Her anger was understandable, as summoning magic turned out to be not so rare. And so, with amazement, everyone saw the fruits of their summoning, the powerful figures of an angel and a demon. Lippis couldn't hide her surprise, because children usually create toys or pets, not such colossuses. But Marco was clearly intrigued, seeing the girls as more than just young summoners. And he, spreading his arms, made them an offer that would change their lives, promising to teach them real magic. Marco continued, explaining that their power was nothing more than the embodiment of their deepest thoughts. And for Miel, it was often the bright image of her mother, whose love protected her as a child. Whereas for Mosley, the summoning of demons was dictated by the dark shadow of his father, who brought only pain. But Marco promised to open this world to them more widely, to teach them not only to summon, but also to freely wield their unique power. After all, even preferences mattered, as in the case of Marco's eccentric, meteorite-loving companion. He waited with genuine curiosity to see what path these young souls would choose. And then the girls, with their characteristic innocence, uttered a word that made even Marco freeze: afterlife. They remembered their mother's last words, spoken on her deathbed, about heaven for the good and hell for the wicked. These words, filled with sorrow and hope, became their only support in a world that had suddenly become hostile. Now they wanted to use their power to direct this world towards justice, where virtue is rewarded and evil is punished. Marco, looking at their determination, only nodded, knowing that these girls were capable of great things. Days passed, filled with learning and new things, but the peace could not last forever. Suddenly, an excited voice was heard, announcing that the Hero Association needed his help. His gaze darkened. After all, it was only recently that his proposal had been rejected. Were they really now pretending as if nothing had happened? It turned out that a certain Swede had appeared in Finland, whose name alone inspired fear. Why couldn't the association, so powerful, handle this on its own? The question hung in the air. His anger was great, mixed with bewilderment at the inaction of those who were supposed to protect the peace. He silently considered what he had heard, a heavy burden of responsibility falling on his shoulders. And the girls, their innocent eyes full of fear, timidly asked, "Are you leading us, Mr. Marco?" The desperate cry of one and the question of the other, trembling with tears, pierced the silence, demanding an immediate answer. But Marco only sighed heavily, his gaze fixed on the infinity of the coming battle for years to come. A timid hope flashed in their children's eyes, the thought of sharing his difficult path. He looked at them in surprise, as if only now realizing the naivety of their desire. It never occurred to him to expose them to such danger, and his resolve only grew stronger. A categorical refusal burst from his chest, leaving no room for argument. But their souls were already wounded by past losses, and the fear of being abandoned again haunted them. Marco tried to find words of comfort, reminding Miel that they were not just objects abandoned to their fate. His palms glowed as he gave them more than just a parting gift. The symbol of strength woven into their clothes was meant to be their protection and a pass to a safe life. Through the pain of separation, he smiled, promising them a new meeting when the time came. In the meantime, they had to be good, keeping faith in his return. But Miel could not accept this new fate. Their fear was deeper than just abandonment. In the depths of the forest, under the cover of ancient trees, they began their long and grueling journey of training. Their only goal was to become strong enough to meet the teacher as equals. In search of their own path, they asked themselves eternal questions about the nature of goodness and about the thin line separating him from the darkness. What is evil, and how to avoid it in this unpredictable world? 2 years hardened them, allowing them to determine for themselves the boundaries between light and shadow, good and evil. Now they knew that good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell, and they were ready to create these worlds with their own hands. Following their distorted ideas, Miel summoned entire legions of heavenly and hellish soldiers. These supernatural guardians were to keep a close eye on every villager, whose every step was now under constant surveillance. For a whole month, every breath and every action was weighed on invisible scales, under the watchful gaze of unearthly overseers. And at the end of the term, the twins were ready to deliver their final, irrevocable verdicts. The basis of their justice was not divine laws, but simple childish instructions that their mother once whispered to them. Don't steal, don't litter, don't make noise, don't lie, don't quarrel, innocent childhood precepts that have now become a death sentence. The rules were so simple, almost naive, that it seemed impossible not to follow them, but for the twins, they were absolute. Even those who followed these bizarre commandments flawlessly found themselves on their knees, begging for mercy under the merciless gaze. A creepy smile, words about kindness that sounded like an ominous harbinger of a completely different outcome. Their faces, exhausted by tears, their desperate pleas echoed in the burning air, full of despair. "Don't be afraid," the shadow whispered, and there was no warmth in that comfort, only a cold promise. For death would be too merciful an outcome, too easy an escape from their terrible design. They promised a paradise woven from eternal sleep, a place far crueler than any hell imaginable. Forever, her childish smile sealed their fate, a smile that hid the abyss of inhumanity. Thus their utopia was born, initially vicious, dividing souls into righteous and sinful according to their own perverted law. Miel and Mael, the creators of this terrible new world order, looked upon their distorted flock. But far from their hellish theater, the big world continued to live its unperturbed life. However, these alarming events could not go unnoticed and became part of the Heroes Association's agenda. Utoriti, the head of the association, called his heroes to an urgent meeting, realizing the gravity of the situation. But as he looked around the half-empty conference room, concern showed on his face. Something was wrong. The conference room, bathed in cold blue light, stood almost empty, reflecting an invisible tension. Only 3 people present were sitting at the massive table, and one of them, leaning back in his chair, clearly expressed dissatisfaction with the situation. The young hero was indignant that only the weaklings from the first floor had gathered here, who were of no interest to him. The head of the Utority Association, in an attempt to calm the fervor, mentioned the third-level goal but admitted its ineffectiveness under the current conditions. The female hero interrupted him with a caustic remark, drawing attention to another issue. She pointed to a holographic image of 2 very young girls, wondering why they were on this list at all. Utorti explained that despite their age, the girls demonstrated a sufficient level of threat to be included on the summons. But the other heroes still considered them too young and suggested waiting until they grew up. The head decisively rejected this idea, saying that waiting 5 years was an unaffordable luxury. With a serious expression on his face, he revealed another important detail that made everyone go silent. These children, he said, were the students of a certain magician, and this information instantly changed the matter. There was a brief argument in the room about who should handle the matter, but Utorti quickly brought the situation under control. At that moment, someone's hand with bright purple nails appeared in the doorway, pointing forward. All eyes turned to the new arrival, bringing a fresh dynamic to the frozen atmosphere. It was K2, a third-tier hero, whose appearance was as flamboyant as her outfit, and she resolutely volunteered to take on the mission. A moment later, she was sitting on her motorcycle, ready to take off, wearing a helmet. Her nimble fingers pulled up her glove, each gesture indicating readiness for action. Taking off her helmet, Katsu revealed her face and, with a sly smile, shouted a farewell cry. She raced away into the sunset, leaving behind a trail of energy and light dissolving into the fiery sky. And her former partner, left alone, only silently watched as the heroine's silhouette melted into the horizon. While he was thinking, at that very moment, others already felt the intrusion, looking at the mysterious projection of the stranger. And this uninvited guest seemed to be completely out of the ordinary, as if he had come from another dimension. With an unperturbed smile, she walked among her companions, leaving behind only guesses and dead silence. The mystery of her power deepened. Were these formidable guardians simply immobilized by her magic? But now, it seems, someone managed to break through her barriers, and the mysterious girl's attention was drawn to a new sound. The same 2 novices who had discovered her now stood before her, stunned and speechless. They called her an outsider, and their voices sounded not only alarmed but also confused. And to this question, what brought her to their world, there was no answer, only cold anticipation. The girl, however, didn't seem to be at all worried, and waved them goodbye carelessly. Her abilities clearly exceeded their understanding, and she herself did not hide her curiosity as she studied them. She continued her questioning, not giving them time to come to their senses, as if playing with her victims. And then, with unexpected insight, she touched on the dangerous topic of their secret powers. The girls shuddered. Because the truth was revealed, they had been hiding their true abilities. The tension grew, and their eyes no longer showed just shock, but real, all-consuming fear. Who is she, this stranger who sees right through them, and what awaits them ahead? But she only smiled creepily, introducing herself as K2, and there was a threat hidden in that name. Their bewilderment grew. There were no elders in their ranks except for one, but K2 continued her story. But Kotu continued to push her line, her true intentions still shrouded in secrecy, eerie and incomprehensible. Her smile grew more menacing as she toyed with a sharp, dangerous object. And now, it seems, the girls will find out why protective magic is not her style, but just a tool for others. He just lost interest in me, her voice sounded, tinged with the bitterness of a forgotten past. The stab of resentment was too deep to simply subside. It throbbed beneath the skin. The mentor was cruel, she whispered in her memories as the crimson fog thickened around her. And at that moment, through tears and a distorted scream, all the pain of her wounded soul burst out. Cruel, she repeated to herself, and the echo of this word fell upon the stunned girls. How could he forget her? He praised her so much, smiled so much when he promised her a great future in magic. While others tried to cast their spells, her words sounded like a death sentence. He just decided to forget me. And so, the last warning came, through the rage and the pain, before she made her choice. Her gaze changed, becoming cold, piercing, reflecting the darkness growing within. The world around her exploded into a whirlwind of sharp blades and thorny needles, embodying her twisted will. A torrent of pain descended upon the victims as her tools began their merciless work. Frightened screams stuck in my throat, and words of support were unable to escape. They were consumed by chaos, falling helplessly under the onslaught of the magical storm. The air filled with screams and crimson splashes, turning the space into an arena of madness. Maybe it will be better this way, was the chilling thought heard in the very epicenter of the destruction. A smile appeared on her face, but it was no longer a human grin, but a mask of pure, eerie triumph. The house shook, collapsing under the onslaught of her boundless, vengeful power. Her wild, booming laughter echoed across the battlefield, becoming the soundtrack to the carnage. How fun, she exhaled, intoxicated by her merciless game, stained with blood. And in the eyes of the surviving girl, not only horror was reflected, but also a spark of desperate, furious resistance. The anxious whisper of one of the survivors broke through the deathly silence, asking about her friend's condition. But for the main culprit of this massacre, the world froze in blissful silence, broken only by her own mad smile. The eyes of the two girls who miraculously escaped death reflected the full horror of what had happened, causing their hearts to clench with pain and hopelessness. This new sensation, born of blood and suffering, was a revelation to her, so this is what it's like to plunge into the abyss of chaos. Much more fun than I could have imagined, she exclaimed triumphantly, raising her hands to the sunset-stained sky. And in this deadly dance, watching the agony of the last of the men, she whispered only one word, full of hungry anticipation: more. Her fingers trembled, forming new, deadly blades from pure energy, and a wild, insane smile played on her face. Just a little more. The neon glint of a purple blade pierced the night air, crashing down on the last remaining survivors. "Farewell!" she cried with cruel glee, confident of the completion of her bloody symphony. But at the last moment, a golden barrier flared up around the survivors, and the man who was with them exclaimed, "Protect his magic." A fleeting look of irritation crossed the mad assassin's face as she hissed, "Oh, your teacher taught you well," a strong defense. But beneath that mocking tone lurked true power, as her summoned companion was already preparing for his own strike. "I haven't even started yet," her voice rang with anticipation, while one of the girls, the one who had survived, looked at her with bloodshot eyes. You're going to hell," growled the one whose spirit refused to break, to which the villainess only casually replied, "How strict you are with your sunbae." "I always dreamed of trying my skills on people, in the very center of the crowd," she whispered, her gaze sliding over the mutilated bodies. "But I knew I'd be tied up right away, no matter how much of a hero I thought I was, so I sat quietly in the shadows. However, you gave me this opportunity by preparing a whole mountain of bodies. I was able to fulfill my wish. Thank you." Her eyes widened wildly as she spread her arms, enveloped in purple energy. "It seems like now I can finally perform the summoning." And sweat appeared on her distorted, ecstatic face. And in her crazy gaze one could read the indescribable pleasure of the approaching climax. "Oh, oh, oh, oh!" A groan escaped her chest, foreshadowing something terrible, forcing the last witnesses to cover their faces in panic. And with a piercing cry of horror, absorbing all sounds, from the very depths of the gaping sky, an ominous entity appeared. A crimson fog enveloped the city, marking the triumph of a new, nightmarish plan. K2's exhausted but maddened face broke into a terrible smile. Her plan had worked. Experience forged from countless lifetimes became fuel for her twisted fantasy. And then, before her shocked eyes, something colossal emerged from nothingness, born from her very essence. Kotu was triumphant, her laughter echoing across the doomed land, and her gaze anticipated the final chord. Farewell, her lips whispered, anticipating a cruel end for everyone who stood in her way. But this madness could not go unpunished, and before the horror of Kotu a new figure appeared, full of despair. The magic circle flared up like a protective barrier, foreshadowing the fury to come. And then Mayel, in despair and rage, felt her own dark power awakening within her. In Kotu, she saw not a man but a true demon, and this revelation greatly enhanced her own abilities. Male, Appa, she whispered, trying to comprehend the irreversibility of what had happened when there was no one left around who could help. What had she done? The question hung in the air as the girl stared in horror at the consequences of her actions. No, it was not a person. Her eyes, full of pain and determination, reflected only a soulless creature of darkness. A year passed, and Meal and Mile, like architects of a new world, built their own reality. They created something grandiose, their own utopia, rising above the ruins of the old world. Their names were heard again at the meeting of heroes, but no longer as saviors, but as a threat. Now they were spoken of as villains, imprisoned on the second underground level of Lucullus prison. Meal and Meal, the amazed man exclaimed, unable to believe what he heard. These are your students. How did this happen? He demanded, but the answer was merely a counter-question. That's exactly what I want to ask you. But the interlocutor, turning his back, stopped further conversation, declaring his intention to leave. No, I won't give you this case, exclaimed the man in the suit, not believing his own ears. Memories flared up like old wounds, accusations of betrayal, of ignoring orders, of surrendering a valuable hostage. That's why I'm not going to listen to your requests, Marco snapped angrily, decisively turning away. But the path was blocked by a menacing shout and a hand shining with blue light. You won't take another step. The air around Marco sparkled with emerald runes, and he cut off his opponent, calling him a madman blinded by the thirst for power. The tension grew as the two titans of power froze in mortal combat, oblivious to the golden hair looming in the shadows. Marco tried to leave again, but his gaze involuntarily stopped on her, on this unexpected guest. It was Lausa, a third-tier hero, whose appearance heralded a new round of intrigue. The man in the suit, taking command, gave the order with ruthless calm. Go, this is a good assignment for your promotion. Marco tried to object, but a harsh shout and the spoken name, Marco, silenced him. Lausa's golden pupil narrowed, reflecting inner concentration and readiness for action. Had she really fallen, or was this just a cleverly staged performance? Trust this to me, sounded in the air like a promise. And over the city, bathed in sunlight, hundreds of shining golden rings began to appear, heralding the coming changes. At the same time, somewhere a quiet, anxious whisper was heard. Mael? The young students, Meal and Mael, froze. We have a stranger. Yes, Appa, the younger one whispered. Their eyes expressed mixed feelings, fear, curiosity, and foreboding, for their thoughts were already drawn to sins. Meanwhile, Laosa stood on the golden-lit street, surrounded by a scarlet halo, ready to take on the challenge of fate. How many sins has this foreigner committed in her entire life? The question hung in the air, full of hidden reproach and anxiety. But Lausa merely looked up at the sun that illuminated the city with a small, confident smile, ready to face any new day. Her image, bathed in the gold of dawn, radiated calm and unshakable determination. But in the depths of his eyes lurked a steely will that knew no doubt. Suddenly, her gaze fell on three figures hovering above the city like grim trophies. These were the ones who came before her, the former heroes, and to her surprise, they were still alive. But their existence could hardly be called life. They were in captivity, their bodies becoming mere shells. Immediately, two girls appeared before Laosa, demanding an explanation of who she was and why she had come. The heroine of Laos, she called herself, had come to take them back. The answer only evoked in them a feeling of disbelief bordering on despair. Heroes again? How many of them have there been already? And the world around them began to shimmer with frightening crimson patterns, foreshadowing an imminent storm. Surrounded by the grotesque shadows of ancient fears, the sisters were already standing in battle readiness. Giant monsters grew behind them, and the voice of one of the girls pierced the air. Leave immediately. Her hand was already clutching a pulsating clot of sinister magic. They threatened her with hellish torments if she dared to disobey. Lausa only smiled in response, her words echoing in the air, I'll take you with me. The mighty beasts, enraged by her defiance, rushed to attack, shaking the earth. But the heroine stood unperturbed, engulfed in golden flames, like an invulnerable goddess. She looked at her opponents without showing a shadow of fear. "Your attacks lack true malice," Lausa remarked to their utter astonishment. "What a shame," she said, "if you had chosen a different path from the start." And, moving forward, she added that their idea of justice was distorted and their fear was useless. Her voice, deceptively calm, promised no harm, but the fear in the girl's eyes betrayed their true feelings. However, her words immediately became distorted, accusing them of some wrongdoing, in sharp contrast to the serene expression on her face. And then came the chilling revelation. Their own teacher, the invisible puppeteer, was watching them. A quiet sigh, shock, and vague awareness froze in the wide-open pupils. "Teacher?" one whispered, and the other, through a veil of horror, dared to hope, "He's back?" Mazel desperately tried to warn her sister, but the woman calmly insisted on her truth, weaving a dangerous spell into her words. A hand, radiating an unearthly glow, extended towards them, an invitation or a trap. "Take off your spell," she coaxed with a cloying smile, "and we will return to the teacher." Their innocent eyes, full of confusion and horror, reflected the internal struggle. One small hand reached out hesitantly, drawn by an invisible force, almost touching the larger, manipulating one. And so, like lambs to the slaughter, the two girls followed her, their fragile figures dwarfed by the powerful woman. A triumphant smirk touched her lips. She knew he would come for her. And then he appeared, the teacher, his presence a beacon of familiar authority amid the gathering fear. "Master!" they cried, throwing themselves into his arms, enjoying the moment of fleeting relief when he spoke their names. Tears streamed down their faces as they revealed their secret, their mother's desperate plea to hide their unique abilities. They apologized for deceiving him, their voices trembling as they revealed their powers, knowing that his school was only for those with the ability to summon. His brow furrowed in confusion. "Who told you this, Missile?" he asked as the sinister image of a hero named K2, who claimed to be his former student, materialized. "A student?" he repeated, confused, stating flatly that he had taught no one but Lippus and them, while the shadow of the other woman washed with a smirk. The girl's expression reflected his shock as he elaborated, remembering only one piece of advice given to her at the hero's council. "What?" he muttered, looking at his fallen students, and a silent realization came to him. Mazel and Mazel never understood the true difficulties of kindness and why their efforts went unrecognized by others. The cold hammer of justice was already raised, deciding the fate of the girls, whose naive intentions did not justify anyone. The old defense attorney tried to soften the sentence, arguing that his young age and the release of the hostages could serve as justification, but his words were met with an adamant refusal. He fell to his knees, whispering Lausa's name, when she said with icy calm, as if doubting his words, "Children?" Even Marco, the formidable enforcer of order, admitted that he did not wish for the death penalty for such young people, but the rules, carved in stone, knew no exceptions. "It's not our job to educate criminals," Lausa insisted, her voice like steel as Marco desperately called out her name, trying to find some kind of loophole. Lausa's gaze turned to the sky, and she said, "I agree, Marco, this world is full of problems." Her amber eyes, full of determination, turned to him. "That's why, Marco. Would you like to join me on my mission?" she offered, her words a challenge, a promise of great change. He looked at her in confusion, not understanding the connection between her grandiose plans and the fate of these unfortunate children. Her answer sounded like a death sentence. "I will change this world." Her eyes shone with boundless power, a readiness to reshape the very fabric of reality. Then her voice became softer, almost pleading, "But I have one condition." "Let these children use their abilities so that they survive to adulthood," she asked, looking at the lying girls. Lausa nodded in agreement. "Okay, until then." Extending her hands over the girls, she enveloped them in light, promising, "They will not die as long as we change this world together." Meanwhile, in the gloomy corridor, the guard stood with his head bowed, absorbed in dark thoughts. "Mr. Kang Yu," his colleague called out quietly, but he didn't move, as if he hadn't heard. A memory flashed before him, his face, free of uniform, when he first met her gaze. That day, Lausa smiled and extended her hand to him. "Kanho told me a lot about you. Would you like to change this world with me?" Now he stood, deep in thought, not knowing how to answer this long-standing but still pressing question. Memories came flooding back, enveloping So Kanyu's consciousness as Lausa's ghost spoke the first word. "We judged people only by our own rules." Her voice, like an echo from the past, sounded not like an excuse, but like an accusation. "What's the difference?" he whispered, feeling old wounds reopening, tearing him apart from the inside. But reality insistently demanded his presence when Kang Ho approached him. Kang Ho and I have done our best to rehabilitate these children, her voice sounded pleading. They realized their guilt, she tried to convey, but her words were drowned out by the growing chaos. Seo Kangyu turned around, and scarlet magic began to weave around his hand, responding to the storm within him. The red threads of his rage, like living veins, pierced the air, entangling Kang Ho. The ground beneath him cracked, splitting with every step he took, and the destructive force continued to grow. The girls, overcome with mortal fear, screamed, their voices filled with a premonition of imminent death. Seo Kang Yu, a piercing whisper, trying to reach his hardened heart. Don't kill us, was a desperate cry that echoed off the walls of their own doom. The crimson storm around Seo Kang Yu grew stronger, turning the surrounding world into an abyss of destruction. Please, please escaped their lips, but they seemed completely useless. We really were wrong, is a belated remorse that sounds at the last moment. His gaze was empty, but his will was unwavering. He was ready to see the matter through to the end. But this was not just a punishment, but a manifestation of something much deeper, a darker mood. He was mired in torment, as if fighting an invisible enemy within himself. His lip was split. And these torments, this internal struggle, echoes of an old proposal, became a portal to true chaos, tearing apart the very fabric of reality and threatening to change this world forever. His world crumbled into pieces, flying apart around him as the hero, wounded and broken, fell to his knees. But even in this agony, in the very heart of the bloody carnage, someone's voice calmly asked about his worries. And there she was, charming and deadly, surrounded by her dark companions, with a smile that made your blood run cold. Condescendingly throwing in that such anxiety does not suit him, and that in real life he is much more attractive than he seemed in their games. The hero's eyes, reflecting all the horror of the moment, flashed with an ominous scarlet light. Sincere but creepy, she drawled out her greeting, addressing him as her dear. Three shadows loomed over him, exuding a threat and some ominous promise of power. Before he could recover, she grabbed him abruptly, and a wave of unbridled strength gushed from her hand. A sharp pain pierced him. Red threads of energy entangled his body, tearing him apart from the inside. But the intervention of one of her henchmen stopped the instant reprisal, calling for etiquette in the conversation, as if reminding the lady that this man is not just prey, but the future, their master. Her angry question was met with a hasty apology and an acknowledgement of Sink's name. After composing herself for a moment, she coughed softly and suggested that they get to know each other again, properly. But this was only a prelude to a new attack. His hand twitched from an invisible grip tearing through the flesh, and the next moment he was thrown back with such force that it seemed as if the very air around him exploded. The graceful gesture of the hand manipulating space easily subjugated him to his will. Smiling her creepy smile, she threw him a phrase about his impatience, as if it was his fault that this was happening. Anticipating their frequent meetings, she suggested a leisurely conversation full of hidden meanings. And now we know her name, Sinka, the mistress of spatial manipulation, who imprisoned them all in a shimmering cube, heralding a new era of subjugation. The exhausted Kangyu seems to already have a premonition of the new madness that is about to befall him. Sinka, enjoying her imaginary rightness, seeks confirmation from those who do not dare to contradict her. His voice trembles with tension because he understands that before him is not just madness, but a threat to the entire universe. But Sinka only smirks, her eyes glowing with a strange light as she announces the imminent extinction of humanity. Kangyu is taken aback, but Jinka already takes the initiative, asking a provocative question. She knows his past, knows he was part of Equality, an organization fighting for balance. Shinka predicts his thoughts, claiming that he must blame either villains or heroes with excessive power for his troubles. But her words sound like a clap of thunder. You are absolutely wrong. Kangyu, as if under attack, covers his face, cursing this madness. And Sinka, with a maniacal gleam in her eyes, reveals her truth. She calls selected genes the curse of humanity. Only those with superior genes are worthy of continuing the family line, she declares, raising her verdict to a pedestal of pseudo-logic. The irony is that select genes, she says, reproduce faster than superior ones, like rodents. She cites past heroes such as Laos from the second generation of Equality as examples. Pointing to the tragic fate of Lausa, Sinka argues that the extinction of the select is a natural selection against which they are powerless. She then turns to Kang Yu, hinting at his new, dark side. He is no longer a hero, and it should be easy for him to kill the weak. With wild delight, she admits that she has fallen in love with this new, ruthless image of his. Lucilis Prison, according to her version, is a place where those who, having superior genes, dared to exterminate the inferior for the sake of progress are locked up. Shinka declares her intention to destroy all heroes who interfere with her evolution, and he will create the world of alphas, where only the strongest will be able to exist, cleared of selected genes. With an innocent smile, she adds that even strong heroes will be given a chance to join this new humanity if they change their minds. The man's face is contorted with determination, and his words hang in the air, foreshadowing a difficult choice. Behind this phrase, spoken with despair, lies the abyss of an inevitable and cruel fate. But, in response, only Shin Ki's mocking voice sounds, defying his threats with impermissible ease. Her companion tries to soften the situation by pointing out an obvious and dangerous misunderstanding. However, Shinka only continues his dangerous game, offering privacy for the act, which shocks more than it frightens. The companion again tries in vain to get through to her because the man was talking about something completely different, about life and death. But Shinka just waves it off, showing that she is not interested in other people's interpretations, only her own will. The man seems stunned by such insolence, unable to find the words to respond, his anger slowly boiling over. Finally, with a clearing of her throat, she drops the jokes, as if gathering her thoughts for a much more serious statement. And then, pointing a finger at him, he announces his role in his grandiose and completely insane scheme. And he appoints himself, with a mad gleam in his eyes and a sinister smile, as Eve, the harbinger of a new world. In her fantasies, they already appear as the first couple, hovering in space, above a new, ideal Earth. It is their offspring, she says, that should lead the next stage of human evolution. She admits that she initially saw Huang Adam and her son, having saved him earlier with a mysterious EMP attack. This revelation strikes the man to the depths of his soul, revealing another thread in her intricate plan. Switching to details, she notes the unexpectedly high level of security of this futuristic prison, as if it were part of her experiment. From the outside, she says, the structure is absolutely invulnerable, an impregnable fortress. That is why, having obtained detailed internal drawings, she acted differently, with surgical precision. Using her unique EMP attack, she dealt devastating blows from within, breaking through the defenses. The mention of the EMP attack only spurred her story on, and she continued talking about her plans after speaking with Huang's son. She nodded sweetly, acknowledging his rightness, and immediately moved on to the painful topic, the reminder of which could not help but sting. Her words, like sharp shards, pierced his memory, awakening anger. But she continued to tease without ceasing, offering a new family, a new government, a new reality. The voiceover questioned his decision, forcing him to choose between the past and the future. Images appeared before his eyes, ghosts of those who had fallen victim to its destructive power. He, however, had already made up his mind long ago, reacting ironically to her feigned surprise. His hand tightened, and the words he wanted to say took on a more sinister tone. Fear distorted her face as she realized that his true intentions were far from merciful. His rage erupted, promising excruciating retribution for every victim. She, and her henchmen along with her, realized with horror the scale of his wrath. In the depths of his scarlet eyes burned a determination ready to take on any challenge. She seemed to be trying to brush off his threat, taking it for another game. But his rage was too real, too tangible to be ignored. The energy emanating from it was so powerful that it shook the very space around it. Meanwhile, her accomplices, captivated by the performance, admired the display of his power. She herself, with a mad gleam in her eyes, felt the growing danger, but only enjoyed it. Space warped under her influence, opening gates to the unknown. He, covered in blood, clenched his fists, preparing for the inevitable fight. Destructive power was concentrated in his hands, ready to fall upon his enemies. But a sudden shout made him freeze, his gaze stopping on something invisible. At that moment, the very air became tense, foreshadowing an imminent collision. His bloodied face, his blazing scarlet eyes, everything betrayed the rage seething inside. But this was only a diversionary tactic, behind which a dangerous game was hidden. A swift blow threw him back, and a red flash cut through space. Watching him from above, these predators enjoyed their cruel fun. The ground shook beneath his feet as he landed, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. The deep crater testified to the incredible force of the blow that had thrown the hero back. And again that mocking look, foreshadowing a new trap. The portal opened, swallowing the laughing enemies, who dissolved into a purple glow. But for him, this was only the beginning, the activation of a special regime available only to a select few. Her face distorted with surprise, because she recognized this terrifying phenomenon. From the depths, from the first level, he soared upward like a predatory shadow engulfed in red light. A crushing blow fell upon her defenses, tearing her spells to shreds. Fear distorted her face as the enemy's strength exceeded all expectations. Red blades of energy pierced the space, pursuing those retreating through shimmering portals. Her fall was swift, and fear was frozen in her wide-open eyes. In his eyes burned an unquenchable fire of determination that knew no mercy. But in the midst of the battle he extended his hand, saving the one who was on the brink. However, this was only one of the many facets of what was happening, and the cat went hunting. And so, when one danger had passed, another arose, requiring immediate intervention. It was a fight to the death, where every mistake would cost lives. A powerful blow threw him into the air, tearing apart the space around him. And again, with furious force, he fell to the ground, leaving bloody traces. Those whose destinies were intertwined with this battle watched all this with bated breath. The warrior, battered but unbroken, stood on the ruins that had become the arena of his struggle. His gaze, full of fire, pierced right through. Meanwhile, the shadow figure whispered about the inevitability of death, pressing on the fragile consciousness. The hero, surrounded by a barrier, only cynically challenged Lady Shinki to make a final decision. His face was distorted by a grimace of pain, and red threads of energy burst out like wounds. The cunning ally continued her manipulations, trying to sow doubts. Sinka herself, torn by internal conflict, mourned the lost lives, not understanding why this choice was made. In response to the threat, a determined fire flashed in the soldier's eyes, and he activated Mod 5. And she finally realized the true nature of what was happening, saying only, "the stratification of space." Her eyes glowed with a purple light, reflecting an unprecedented power. And in that same moment, reality around changed, revealing countless prisons floating in the void. The hero found himself drawn into this other world, surrounded by red clots of energy, like ghostly shackles. But even in a hopeless situation, his voice sounded confident, representing the true culprits. Horror gripped Shinku as she realized they were on the third underground floor, the very heart of their hellish plot. Esward emerged from the darkness, his voice a reproach, regretting the loss of Marco as his creative powers were revealed. And then Ho appeared, predatory and seductive, challenging the world, "Who will tame me?" Esward emerged from the darkness, his voice a reproach, lamenting Marco's death as his creative powers unfolded. Then Ho appeared, predatory and seductive, challenging the world, "Who will tame me?" And so, with doubt in his voice, the elder Priyatua asked whether it was worth trusting his time-drained strength. But Natura, with a grin on his lips, snapped, "There is nothing useless in this world if you know how to use it." While Pekinu, trembling with horror, whispered only one word, reflecting all her fragility, "It's scary." Off to the side, shrouded in pipe smoke, Beatty said thoughtfully, as if recalling a long-forgotten melody, "This reminds me of something." And then Mores, the embodiment of severity, unleashed her wrath, demanding order in the chaos of this new reality. Shinshi and Tiburon, a strange duo of girl and beast, exchanged remarks, creating a whirlwind of absurdity and surprise. Kyung Ju-yong, with a smile on his face, said a phrase that chilled you to the bone, "There are things worse than monsters." Taujir, realizing her vulnerability, cried out bitterly, "The scabbard is empty," her gaze filled with anxiety. And Stiffness, mighty and ruthless, sneered, "Dependent on weapons is useless," challenging her very essence. Therapy's gaze slid into the past, and he asked quietly, his voice full of hidden meaning, "The fourth is still alive?" Meanwhile, Meledity, wild and free, enjoyed her essence, exclaiming about the comfort of her true form. And then Hero appeared, silent and mysterious, his presence only deepening the mystery. Suddenly, the crimson pupil opened wide, piercing the darkness with an unbearable fire. On the horizon, through the raging purple funnel, loomed the silhouettes known as the fifth-floor criminals. Ahura, cold and collected, merely watched, her silence heavier than any words. But the mad Huang Song-hwan, baring her teeth and holding something bloody, screamed out a name, "So Kang Yu." Reality cracked at the seams, blood-red fissures tearing space apart. The chaos grew, and through these gaping wounds of the world, silhouettes appeared, foreshadowing the inevitable. And then he appeared, Maud, standing in the epicenter of the storm, shrouded in an aura of boundless power. With a mad grin, as if anticipating a bloody game, he beckoned to fate. And Maud, responding to this call, became enveloped in crimson flames, his form distorted, becoming the embodiment of rage. The evil genius hovered in the air, clutching a blood-red sphere in his hand, his words a promise to continue the cruel game. In response, Maud only strengthened his aura, his gaze, like an ember in the night, burning with inexorable determination. The provocation reached its peak when the opponent, playfully extending his hand, met the growing shadow of a monstrous force. The red sphere, the heart of their dangerous duel, pulsed in his palm, reflecting the crimson power below. He challenged the monster itself, whose form was now barely discernible behind the whirlwind of destructive energy. And then Maud struck, a giant flaming claw capable of tearing the very fabric of reality. But the enemy did not flinch, responding with a blinding wave of energy that tore apart the darkness of the sky. The terrible roar of battle rolled across the world, absorbing every sound, every hope. It broke the silence of the prison walls, echoing in the farthest cells. Even the witnesses of this furious battle were shocked. "What a wild way of fighting," they whispered, watching the chaos. Others, more cynical, speculated about the fate of those caught in the blast's epicenter, considering them useless victims. But for those on the front lines, there was no choice but to flee, overcome with panic and confusion. The general, her eyes wide with horror, could not understand how all this could have happened. Meanwhile, the world around Maud continued to transform, turning into sharp, blood-red crystals. He dropped to one knee, but even in that position, every muscle in his body exuded raw power. It was the Zero Mod, a form that carried within itself pure, unadulterated destruction. Meanwhile, the heroes of equality claimed that all the criminals from the lower floors had been captured, presenting their version of what happened. But the hero, himself amazed by Maud's power, realized why Lausa had always tried to contain such wild and uncontrollable power. Death is what I saw in the eyes of this man, in his furious red impulse. If power could take form, this is what it would look like, an all-consuming crimson abyss that sucked in anyone who dared to look. Someone, as if enchanted, felt an intoxicating inspiration from such unbridled power, striking in its beauty. Others, with despair, realized that before them was something unique, impossible to repeat, and only bitter envy pierced their hearts. And tears of bitter sadness forced out the question, why did he choose this path? Why was he so desperately striving for destruction? But among these feelings, breaking through the chaos, there shimmered a wild, almost insane joy, illuminating So Kangyu's face. He was seething with excitement at the prospect of meeting true power, something Maud had never shown even in their own battles. "Amazing," he exclaimed, his laughter echoing around the arena as Maud transformed into his monstrous, red form. But even this terrifying power seemed to be only a prelude. Seo Kang-yu, his eyes now glowing with a piercing blue light, felt in his gut that Maud was still hiding something deeper, more menacing. And indeed, the crimson flame suddenly burst into blinding blue discharges. Waves of pure energy crashed down on everything around. Every movement of Maud now exuded destructive power. Seo Kang-yu, without wasting a second, rushed forward, intending to confront this monster. But Maud was faster, his giant red paw slamming down, trying to crush his opponent. Dodging, Seo Kang-yu barely had time to feel the force of the blow that shook the ground. Then Maud transformed again, becoming enveloped in a shimmering blue light. He concentrated, gathering the energy for a crushing compression, preparing to release it on his target. An explosion of blue flames split the air, destroying everything in its path. A young woman watched this furious battle, amazed by his strength. How dangerous is he if he can do this even without special abilities? In the midst of the carnage, he seemed to sense the awakening of a new, mature force within himself. His voice cuts through the air, filled with anticipation of the fight, calling out his name, So Kan-yu. But his opponent seemed to have disappeared, leaving only the question of his mysterious retreat. Furious, he searches for the familiar face, refusing to believe it has fled. Suddenly, a monstrous red shadow falls upon him from the clouds of smoke. A monster full of frantic power strikes blow after blow, not giving you time to recover. The fighter's body flies back, pierced by sharp pain and the awareness of a new threat. Red energy pulses, preparing for the crushing conclusion of the attack. Far below, in a shelter, a young woman watches the unfolding nightmare with alarm. This is no longer just a fight, but a merciless battle between true monsters. But the bloodthirsty monster has no intention of sparing anyone, and now his target is unwitting witnesses. Red beams pierce the air, forcing them to dodge the deadly fury. With incredible speed, the beast rushes forward, embodying pure, destructive power, and then another warrior appears, instantly erecting a glowing green barrier. Protective magic flares, absorbing the blow and holding back the monster's onslaught. The monster's voice, full of caustic mockery, hints at long-forgotten connections and old wounds. The shield trembles, but the warrior holds on, his face distorted with tension. Even at this critical moment, he cannot help but acknowledge the enemy's incredible power. But the battle continues. A white, streamlined creature breaks away from its place, piercing space. It appears in all its transformed power, ready for the decisive battle, like the very embodiment of a new era. But even this show of force cannot hide deep insecurity and something unsaid. Through the blood-red veil, something else lurks, not fully revealed. A mysterious adversary, with a smile stained with blood, pierces with her gaze. She senses deception. Are you really holding back because you fear punishment from your superiors? Her words hit the mark. Or perhaps you are simply weak in your current form? The caustic question hangs in the air, full of challenge. With a maniacal smile, she extends her hand, clutching the pulsating crimson clod in it, promising, "I will create our own arena for you and me." Her fist clenches and reality around her begins to crack like fragile glass. Majestic structures disappear under the cover of stellar chaos. The world around them shrinks. The sky is covered in impenetrable darkness, swallowing up everything that was once reality. A deep, bottomless crater opens up, dragging down the remains of the visible world. The officers, who had been watching helplessly, froze in horror, their faces distorted by pure fear. "What again?" the woman screams, but her words are drowned out by the roar of distorted space. Even a seasoned hero, closing his eyes, feels the growing power and anticipation of irreversible changes. Blue energy flares, consuming him, pulling him into the core of the new world that has been created. He plunges into the abyss, where time and space lose their meaning, preparing for a new stage of the battle. And from this abyss, through a furious red squint, a silent, decisive answer sounds, "Let's start from this moment." The enemy's eyes shine with madness, anticipating the coming battle, and in her hand she still clutches her sinister artifact. "We'll give it our all," she exults, as the cries of horror from the doomed witnesses ring out around her. An explosion of blue energy tears through space, creating an avalanche of ice and fragments, each one bringing destruction. A crushing wave of power sweeps across the arena, creating chaos of light and shadow, causing the world to tremble. The red matter, in response, gathers into menacing squalls, pulsing with its own ominous power. But a new flash of blue power breaks through the bloody curtain, colliding with the darkness at the epicenter of the storm. And then, someone's hand, wrapped in bandages, appears from the raging magic, stretching out to meet the chaos. The young warrior, shrouded in mystery, looks upon the destruction with an almost childish smile of delight, as if welcoming a new challenge. The gaze is piercing, and the pupil shimmers purple, reflecting the depth of the awakened power. The red monster emerges from the depths again, its shape distorting as it approaches the bandaged hand. At that critical moment, a barrier flares up from behind the white-haired man, reflecting the red attack like a shield of pure purple light. A powerful woman, like a goddess of war, rises to the defense, her voice echoing across the battlefield, "Do not dare touch those who wield true power." Meanwhile, another group, who had been watching until now begins to move, their eyes full of determination. The girl, her face focused, drops to one knee, her hand touching the ground, which responds to her with a shimmering call. "What is this?" One of the companions exhales in surprise, feeling a sudden surge of energy around her. Ice crystals begin to form around her palm, pulsing with a cold, glowing light. In her eyes, where peace once lurked, an ominous purple symbol now burns, foreshadowing a storm. A sharp blade, forged from pure ice and glowing with purple light, materializes in her hand, ready for battle. She rises, holding the ice sword at the ready, her gaze full of deadly determination. "What are you trying to achieve?" asked the other, her words tense, sensing the inevitable confrontation. Between them, invisible barriers woven from pure energy grow, dividing the space. The face of one of them is distorted with horror and recognition. "Bye," she whispers, realizing the depth of what is happening. "Why waste our energy on a useless fight? We can just leave," one declares, and the other, agreeing, leads the group away. And so, the world changes, leaving the destroyed arena behind, giving way to the everyday bustle of the city as if nothing had happened. Suddenly, something shatters the illusion of normalcy, causing the crowd to freeze in stunned shock. Something ominous, cloaked in a pulsating red light, appears out of nowhere in front of them, causing one of them to gasp, "What is that?" The air around the monster sparkles with a mysterious purple energy, foreshadowing an unknown threat. And as soon as the last ray of dawn has time to disappear behind the horizon, the whole world is plunged into a blinding flash, distorting reality. A moment later, the bustle of the city returns, but the faces of passers-by are frozen with a silent question, "What was that?" Meanwhile, in another dimension, among the tormented rocks, a crimson silhouette rises, shrouded in an aura of destruction. Its spiky form, as if forged from rage itself, seems to embody ancient chaos. And from the deep recesses of his face shine two ominous eyes, full of unbridled, boundless power. In the distance rises a gigantic, broken mass, which may once have been a mountain but is now only a silent testimony to the catastrophe. And then, from the heavens, a luminous hand descends, huge and powerful, ready to unleash its wrath. A warrior in white bandages hovers above the rubble, gathering the azure sky in his palms, while a red figure raises its gaze to him. With a wild cry, a blinding, concentrated charge of energy bursts from his chest, tearing apart space. A deafening bang shakes the world, and reality shatters into 1,000 pieces, like broken glass. After the explosion, only golden dust dances in the air, enveloping everything in a mysterious glow. The warrior in white robes, having lost his balance, tumbles in this golden haze, falling helplessly downwards. But, like an unbending rod, he regains his footing, stepping firmly across the wounded earth. In the distance, a crimson entity falls to one knee, but then begins to transform, turning into something even more terrifying. Meanwhile, in the distance, a group of observers stood frozen, their gazes riveted on the unfolding battle as if it were a fateful spectacle. "We mustn't disturb him," one says, her eyes sparkling with determination. "We'll just have to see how things unfold first." They remember how they once held back criminals from the upper floors, those whom even the mighty Seneca couldn't cope with. "Hello, my name is Cinca." This is how she greets those who could become her victims or allies. A mighty warrior appears before her, his smile promising more than just a greeting. "I will fulfill your desires," sweet, enticing words that can seduce even the most persistent. It is not just a desire, it is an ancient, unquenchable thirst that drives the world and humanity. If she were a mere mortal, this thirst would consume her entirely, but her gaze hides something else. But by touching the criminal's deepest desires, she set in motion an irreversible process. In the shadows, eyes watch her, eyes that have seen too much not to sense a trick. She managed to do what seemed unthinkable, unite these monsters in her alpha world. "Naturally," she begins, but a question from the one who dared to challenge her interrupts her. "Then," he drawls, foreshadowing the inevitable. There was no trace of regret on his face, only a cold foreboding. "Unfortunately for you, you will die," comes the dispassionate verdict. Their faces were distorted with horror, for there were no other reasons besides this absolute one. "Ah, Huang Song Huang," the name was called out, followed by an uncontrollable, ominous laugh. "A new humanity?" echoes the question in the vast hall where only a select few have gathered. "And that's why you want to marry Seo Kang Yu, and then me?" he smirks, seeing through her plans. "You're funny." "I'm glad I made you laugh," she replies, not at all embarrassed, her smile only growing wider. "But what do you say to this?" Her eye, marked with a mysterious symbol, sparkles enigmatically. "Fighting with Seo Kang Yu will be much more fun," he proclaims with wild excitement, and the name Mr. Song Hwan echoes around. His words shock her and she exclaims, "If you always seek only pleasure, you will become addicted to dopamine." But a voice from the shadows, belonging to a young man clad in bandages, calmly continues, "When you grow up, you will become even stronger. And then the fight with him will be much more interesting," he finishes, while the three strangers look at him with interest. A charming lady with a beaming smile picks up. "Let's live longer if you take our side. Then joy will accompany you until the end of your days," she promises jubilantly, extending her hand. Her words make him stop, and deep thought appears in his eyes. In response to her unbridled enthusiasm, only a slight, barely noticeable smile appears on his lips. "Well, let's try it," he suddenly agrees, and a joyful cry of, "Oh, oh, oh," fills the air. The woman is literally beaming with happiness. "Excellent! You made the right choice." But a subtle hint of doubt flickers in the young man's eyes. "But if I don't love you," he asks calmly, "then how do you imagine our wedding?" She just smiles softly, coming closer. "Everything is fine. This love will come to you in time," she whispers, her eyes shining with a strange light, her face moving closer to his. Suddenly, a crimson energy shoots through him, erupting from his back, and his eyes widen in shock and pain. In the distance, a giant, red, demonic figure rises above the shattered land, its fury shaking the world. Blood flows from the monster's mouth as it pulls its hand back, leaving only chaos and destruction in its wake. "Heh heh," the young man grins, wiping the blood from his lips. "You shouldn't have done that with one hand." "Say something already, Seo Kang Yu," he provokes the monster, looking at its monstrous form. Are you going to remain silent, or are you simply unable to speak in this guise? He continues, enjoying his muteness. Ah, you know what? His eyes light up with an ominous glint as he seems to remember something. He holds a glowing red stone in his hands, his smile growing even wider and crazier. This is your brother. The monster's eyes fill with unbearable rage, his pupils narrow to bloody dots, and his face distorts with rage.